Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, my mother tentatively answered the telephone. She looked a little on edge and a tad apprehensive. I was certain she was hearing from the local hospital, for we were expecting a phone call from them to update us on Aunt Helena's progress. I watched my mother's withered face to get a sense of what the doctor was telling her, as I assumed that that was whom she must be currently talking to. I watched my mother with eager expectation. I was hoping to hear good news, a nod of the head perhaps, or my mother saying, "Oh, that is so good to hear. That's very encouraging." But those were not my mother's words. Instead, she was saying, "No, that can't be. There must be a mistake. No, you must have got that wrong." My heart sank as her face had drained of all its colour, which was a very bad sign indeed. I knew by the dismayed expression that my mother wore on her pretty face that it had become profoundly serious and circumspect, as if a dark cloud had suddenly descended upon us, that something was terribly wrong. My gut began to writhe uneasily at my mother's uptight body language that hinted that something dreadful must have happened to poor Aunt Helena. Had she got worse, I wondered? Was she still even alive? Let's just say, with my highly suggestible, childlike imagination, I feared the very worst for Aunt Helena. We had recently lost our beloved Weimaraner Max, whom my father had owned for 18 years. And at 10 years old, Max's fortuitous departure from my life was the first time that I'd ever become acquainted with death. I was the one that discovered Max, lying in the azalea bush in our backyard, and he wouldn't move. I shook him so hard, but he simply refused to budge, and was so cold to the touch it sent chills down my own spine. I remember rushing back to the house, rippled with dread. I called my mother. "Mummy, something is wrong with Max. He won't wake up." My mother took one look at me, never said a single word, but her eyes were peppered by anguish. She hurriedly followed me to the backyard. She was half running and walking at the same time. I remember so vividly that her face looked haunted when she saw Max lying motionless under the bush. For a moment she threw her hand over her mouth, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing with her own eyes. "Oh, no, please God, no!" she cried out, bending down on all fours to examine Max closely. She was feeling him for any signs of movement. For a pulse or a heartbeat, perhaps, but she got nothing. Max had already grown stiff, as rigor mortis was beginning to set in. My mother shook her head lugubriously and said, "I'm so sorry, Hunter. I'm really sorry." Her voice was so soft it was almost a strained whisper. I looked at my mother, my face contorted in horror. "Mummy, do something!" I cried out. "Please do something for Max," I begged. "Take him to the vet. The vet can wake him up. The vet will make him better. I know he will." "He is going to be all right, isn't he, Mum?" I cried, tears spilling down my cheeks unabashedly. "Mum, please, say he's going to be all right. He is going to be all right, isn't he? Please, Mummy. I pleaded again. My mother shook her head defiantly. I'm so sorry, Hunter. I don't know what to say to you. There's nothing we can do for Max now. She took me into her arms lovingly and kissed the top of my head, rocking me in her arms, almost as if I was a baby, while I sobbed in her chest, so that I saturated it with my tears, of which there were so many. Despite my mother's kind, reassuring words, I simply could not be comforted or consoled. I wanted Max to be all right. That's all I cared about. He was my best friend, and with him gone, his absence would tear my life apart. I just knew things would never ever be the same without that lovable ball of energy running around. Even though Max had been old, he still never refused to chase a ball or thump his tail on the carpet if you offered him a doggy treat, for the puppy inside him had never left him. I'm so sorry, Hunter. What can I say? My mother said stoically. Remember, sweetheart, Max was over 18 years old. That's a very long life for a dog, you know, especially in a breed such as a Weimaraner, a large dog breed where dogs don't live as long as small dogs. So Max has had a very good life, and a very high-quality life too. Many dogs don't live nearly so long. Max never had any health problems to speak of, so we need to be grateful for that. He died on his own terms, did he not? We can be glad he died peacefully in his sleep, and that is a very good way to go. He must have died of old age. Unfortunately, it happens to us all at some point. I did warn you that we needed to be prepared for this, that one day Max would die. Thankfully, we didn't have to euthanize him. We got spared of that. So it's a mercy, let me tell you. I had cried out, No, he can't have gone. He can't have gone. I released myself from my mother's arms, pushing her away from me. I fell onto the ground in a crumpled heap. I began to shake Max's body as hard as I could, to try and rouse him from his slumber. But my efforts had been completely futile. I sobbed and sobbed. My mother was unable to offer me any reassurances, as I cuddled up to Max and cried in his soft fur, until finally my mother dragged me away from him. The idea that Max would never play ball with me again, or cuddle up to me, was too unbearable to even comprehend. That was when I learnt, at that young age, how cruel death could be. Me and my mother finally buried Max in the backyard. We had a ceremony for him. We laid down flowers, and my mother read extracts from the Bible. I carved out a grave marker for him, but I could never get over the fact that he was gone from our lives for good. As my mother was currently talking on the phone in earnest, she was wearing an expression on her face that was nauseatingly hopeless, the very same expression I'd seen on her face when observing Max's lifeless body lying under the azalea bush. My mother's anguished demeanour scared me half to death. I jumped to the wild, frantic conclusion that Aunt Helena must be dead. I felt indignantly angry about this, and seriously affronted. I wanted to blame someone for this unfairness. I really felt as if our family had been put through a mincemeat processor. We had only just recently lost Max, and now Aunt Helena. This just could not be happening to us, I thought. It just couldn't be. I loved my Aunt Helena so much. She might have been a bit dithery, but she was so fun to be around, and the idea of Aunt Helena having dropped down dead because of the injury she had sustained on her head was something my 10-year-old body simply could not entertain. I guess the subject of death had been preying heavily on my mind after Max had died. Ostensibly, all I could think about was death. I missed him so much when I woke up in the morning, and I'd often think I could feel him lying at my feet. But when I opened my eyes slowly and surely, I discovered that, to my bitter disappointment, that my dog was not there. I felt this vacuous emptiness inside me, as without him around, life was so much less rich. My mother had promised me we'd get another dog, but I didn't believe any dog on this earth could ever replace Max. Max was one of a kind. I doubt even a clone made of Max would have had his personality. Let's not kid. I was scared of death, but then who isn't? I couldn't imagine what it was like not to exist anymore. My mother assured me that Max had definitely gone to heaven and was thoroughly enjoying life on the other side with the angels. But my father had scolded my mother about saying such things when he heard her talking to me in this manner.
"Don't be so ridiculous, Bridget. Honestly, listen to yourself. Why don't you tell the boy as it is? Don't go feeding Hunter ridiculous fairy tales, or wrapping him up so carefully in cotton wool, just to save his feelings. He needs to know the truth. That's the problem with helicopter parents these days. They always put a band-aid over everything that hurts to make it better, sometimes ripping the band-aid off the wound and exposing it to the light instead of covering it up. Makes things heal a hell of a lot faster." "Son," said my father, looking at me straight in the face, "you're a big boy now, so you deserve to know the truth. I know it's not easy to hear, but Max is dead. Your dog is not coming back. He's gone for good. And no, he's not in heaven with the angels, as your mother has told you. There's no such place, I'm afraid. Your mother made that all up to make you feel happier and better about his departure from our lives. The truth is, son, death is brutal, and it's final. It happens to us all, I'm afraid. Max was a very much loved, very treasured member of our family. But ultimately it was his time to go. Now he is no more. He's a pile of bones in the backyard that you and your mother buried. He will turn to dust in due course, and then fertilize the earth."
"But Mum says that Max is in heaven with the angels, that one day I'll see him again," I protested, as I fought back my indignant tears. How could my father be so cruel, saying all these unkind things? Max was very much alive in my heart, and I really wanted to believe with all my soul that we would be reunited once again. My dad was brazenly stealing that hope away from me.
"Don't listen to your father, love. You will see Max again. I can assure you of that,"
my mother said, giving my father a "how dare you" face. My father ignored my mother and continued,
"Hunter, people talk about this beautiful place called heaven, don't they? And they do this to comfort each other, to make the idea of dying not seem so final. The truth is, once we die, son, we are no more. But we won't know anything about it. So in the grand scheme of things, what does it matter anyway? We become dust. There is no heaven as far as I'm concerned, even though the Bible tells us there is. I personally do not believe a word of it. Look at the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, for example. All the stuff they preserved in their tombs to take to the afterlife, including all their stuff. In human history, people have always wanted to believe there is more after this life. Your mother made that stuff about heaven up, didn't you, love?" he said, expecting my mother to nod her head in agreement and profusely apologize for leading me astray with her wistful fancies. "Honestly, you're the end, Anton. You really are,"
my mother protested, glaring at my father furiously. He was so taken aback by the look she gave him.
"Heaven is real, and I don't care what you say about it. I know it is, and the Bible makes it clear it is. That is where Max is right now, and I know one day our Hunter will be reunited with him. Don't listen to your father, Hunter. He doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. He believes there is no God. When you think like that, you're known as an atheist. It's terrible to be an atheist because you have no hope in anything after this life. And personally, if there was no life after death, what would be the point of life at all? There would be no point. In my opinion, Max is in heaven, and you will see him again one day. Just because your father disagrees on this does not mean your father is right. In my experience, I have found that your father is wrong about many things, and this is one of them."
My mother found it almost impossible to forgive my father for crushing my dreams. She went on to assure me that one day I would definitely meet up with Max in heaven. But my father's ruthless honesty had robbed me of that hope that my mother had magnanimously given me, like a precious gift that I would look forward to opening one day. Don't get me wrong, my father meant well. He was a good man, whom I looked up to and revered, as little boys always tend to do when it comes to their fathers. That's why his opinion on the hereafter affected me very deeply. I thought my father was right about many things. I don't think he meant to be unkind. On the contrary, I think he thought he was doing me a big favour, telling me straight how he believed the world actually worked. But I was not ready to hear his rather hardened view of reality. As being a 10-year-old boy with an impressionable imagination, my father robbed my life of so much magic when I was young. My father was a pilot, hired by the very wealthy, who owned their own private planes. My father took millionaires to exotic locations around the globe on private jets. He was the kind of pragmatic person that lived a sensible, no-nonsense life without any frills. Ostensibly he had a scientific, mathematical background, and didn't believe in anything that you couldn't physically see with your naked eye. If you had suggested to my father, for example, that ghosts existed, and that aliens had been visiting our planet for centuries, or that cryptid creatures existed here in North America, he'd unhesitantly laugh in your face, and probably think you were a big idiot for believing in such nonsensical stuff. I was the kid that grew up knowing that Santa Claus was not real. My father assured me that such fictitious characters did not exist. I did, of course, get a stocking every Christmas, as regular as clockwork, but the dreams of a man with a white beard leaving me a stocking on the fireplace, having travelled from afar away, from the North Pole perhaps, with all his reindeers, was not a dream that I could ever enjoy entertaining, like so many kids my age invariably did. I had friends, for example, who left out milk and cookies for Santa Claus, but I never had the heart to tell them that Santa wasn't real. I didn't want to ruin their fun, as my father had ruined mine. I guess my father wanted my life not to be peppered or clouded with anything that was imaginary. He had no time for such hare-brained indulgences in his own life. I know on a personal level he couldn't understand my mother's love for fictional books, which she'd regularly read as a form of escapism. He'd raise a cynical brow at her and say, "Why, Bridget, are you filling your head with so much nonsense? None of these stories are remotely true. Why don't you tune into something factual that can broaden your knowledge and your understanding of things?" To give my mother her due, she'd fight back by saying, "You'd be surprised, sweetheart. Sometimes fiction can be more real than our own lives are. I wouldn't be remotely surprised if half the things I read about in these fictional books happen in the real world." At that my father was put well in his place, for never was a truer word spoken. As my mother was speaking on the phone on a call that never seemed to end, I was getting unduly distressed, for she was saying things like, "But no! Are you sure? There must be some mistake. What do you mean gone? How can you be sure of this? How can it be gone?" I was convinced this conversation she was having was all about Aunt Helena. Based on what she was saying, I alarmingly deduced that either Aunt Helena was gone because she'd actually popped her clogs as a result of her head injury, or she'd wandered out of the hospital and was now walking down the highway in an absolute dither, standing among the traffic, looking like a spaced-out zombie that was high on methamphetamines, waiting to be run over by a passing car that failed to see her. I knew she'd been taken to hospital after having been found wandering aimlessly around the woods in a dreadful daze, as if she didn't know who on earth she was. The doctors emphatically believed that Aunt Helena was suffering from some kind of concussion, from a head injury that had brought on a seemingly chronic case of amnesia, which the doctors assured my mother would probably pass. "Are you sure she'll get her memory back, Dr. Levine?" my mother had asked him. "I'm really worried about her. Very worried. My sister doesn't even realize or even know that I am her sister. Do you realize how distressing this is for me, Dr. Levine? She stares at me as if I'm a stranger. I can't understand how she can't remember me. It makes no sense to me at all. How is it possible to forget your own family? A moment ago she mistook me for the nurse." "Look, Mrs. Stevenson,
I know this isn't easy. We have established that your sister Helena must have sustained some kind of head injury. How she acquired this, we do not know. That in itself is a mystery. There is some serious bruising on her brain. As a result, she suffered from some kind of concussion. Her memory has been impaired. She is suffering from some kind of amnesia. This is pretty commonplace when it comes to head injuries. But we won't know what is going on with her until we've done further tests.
But Dr. Levine, she is going to be all right, is she not? Please say she's going to be all right. My sister and I are incredibly close. We do everything together. I'm going to get her back, am I not?
I'm quite sure she'll be fine, Mrs. Stevenson. I do believe there is no reason for you to panic, Mrs. Stevenson. Not at this stage, anyway. Let's just say your sister is wide awake and she's talking, so she's in sound mind. As for personality changes, yes, they can happen, and they do happen. I've seen them myself. I knew a woman once who fell off her horse. She had been a sports fanatic all her life, addicted to life in the great outdoors. These days she's become passionate about sewing. I understand she makes beautiful eiderdowns for people. She has no interest in outdoor activities anymore. So yes, personality changes can and do happen. But in your sister's case, I think it is unlikely.
But what do you think happened to my sister, Dr. Levine? Why does she have this nasty head injury in the first place? You don't believe it's nefarious, do you? You don't think somebody could have deliberately hurt her, pushed her over, perhaps? I do know that she was wandering around close to the rock pool. She goes there regularly for swims, you know. There are lots of rocks surrounding the water, and a huge waterfall. It's a possibility she might have slipped and taken a huge fall on her head. What do you think happened, Dr. Levine?
I wish I knew the answer, ma'am. I can't answer that question for you, and maybe I never will be able to. Your guess is as good as mine. The only way we'll really know what happened to her is if Helena remembers herself when she comes around from her amnesia.
My mother had told me that they were doing all kinds of scans on my Aunt Helena, as you would do in any head injury case. My Aunt Helena, at the best of times, was scatty and hopelessly disorganized. She had a memory on her rather like a sieve, which never did her any favours. So I was certain the head injury would make Aunt Helena even more absent-minded, and that wasn't a reassuring thought. My mother would tirelessly remind Aunt Helena of family events from a couple of years earlier, and her memory was always so obscurely vague. I remember even at 10 years old, I found it rather confounding how easily Aunt Helena forgot things.
Goodness gracious me! You do surprise me, Bridget. I didn't know that happened.
She'd look at my mother with a perplexed expression on her face. My mother would nod and say, "Yes, that was last Thanksgiving, don't you remember? We invited Reverend Owen and his wife around to join us." Aunt Helena would shake her head and say, "I'm sorry, Bridget, I just don't remember." Aunt Helena was also forever losing her keys. She never knew where she'd misplaced them. She'd sometimes even go to the supermarket and return home to find her shopping was not in the trunk. She would then go straight back to the store, discovering that her trolley was still in the car park, filled with her shopping that she'd failed to unpack. I don't know many people that are that forgetful, but that was Aunt Helena for you. I found her quirky, idiosyncratic behaviour rather amusing. My mother less so, even though my mother would tease Aunt Helena about her scattiness, telling her to be careful because one day she might actually lose her head. And now it would seem she had done just that, in a manner of speaking. By all accounts, at 10 years old, it was very hard for me to fathom that someone could actually forget who they were. We had been informed that a kind local farmer in the area had found Aunt Helena and brought her safely to the hospital. When she was found, her body appeared to be covered in scratches and bruises, and her hair looked tangled as leafy green foliage was caught between the strands, almost as if Aunt Helena at some point had been lying across the forest floor, which the doctors believed was probably a distinct possibility. If she had fallen and hit her head, and had been knocked out for a while, who knows how long she could have been lying there. When she had awoken from this fall, she had likely been disorientated and wandered around the grove aimlessly, rather like a zombie, caught up in a delirious confusion. The farmer had spotted my aunt quite by accident. He had been driving his Land Rover Discovery down a dirt road, and happened to see some movement in his peripheral vision. He turned around to look and observed my aunt behaving very strangely, and this caught his undivided attention, especially since my aunt appeared to be in quite the state, covered in scuffs and scrapes. I suspect, had it not been for the oddity of her strange behaviour, the farmer wouldn't have given Aunt Helena a second glance or a passing thought, as several people ambled along in those woods to enjoy some fresh air and invigorating exercise from time to time. This trail in North Carolina was quite popular with some locals. It led to spectacular waterfalls and some stunning rock pools, where in the heat of the summer many people would enjoy a swim, and Aunt Helena loved taking dips in those rock pools. She talked about it often enough. The farmer said that Aunt Helena appeared to be standing in the woods having a conversation with a tree, but she was covered in dirt and her clothes had been reduced to rags. So he found this rather unsettling, and the more he watched her, the more convinced he became that something wasn't right with her. Let's just say he didn't know Aunt Helena in person, but he certainly knew the farmhouse where she lived, and had spotted her in town on numerous occasions, so he was somewhat familiar with her. Initially it occurred to him that Aunt Helena could be as drunk as a skunk, or possibly high on drugs, but he thought it was rather unlikely. She was staggering around awkwardly, as if she couldn't stand up straight. Her shoulders were stooped forward, and her head hanging at a very odd angle. It seemed like she didn't know where on earth she was. Ironically, only the week before he'd stood behind Aunt Helena in the supermarket queue, and they'd got into a conversation together about how ridiculously expensive the cost of living had become, as even all those years ago people complained bitterly about the steep pricing of things. Nowadays we would do anything to go back to those prices. "It's ridiculous," my aunt told the farmer. "Absolutely ridiculous. If our governments were more careful with our taxpayers' money and spent it more wisely, things would not be so expensive." The farmer had agreed with her wholeheartedly and said, "We don't need bureaucrats running our country, telling us what to do the whole time. We need the people in charge, and then our lives would be so much better. Governments steal our taxpayers' money and do nothing to improve the quality of our lives. Daylight robbery it is." I guess nothing has changed in that regard. The farmer had described my aunt as being very articulate, so seeing her a week later in the woods like this, looking incredibly out of place, he realized he had to investigate what she was doing, as something was distinctly off about her demeanour. It was when he approached Aunt Helena rather gingerly to ask her what was wrong. That was when he noticed the injury on her head. She had a huge gash on her skull, and it was covered in dry blood. It was then the farmer realized Aunt Helena was not drunk, but had sustained a fall in some way, and hit her head very badly. He thought that perhaps she'd taken a casual stroll down the woodland trail to get some energizing exercise and some crisp fresh air. Maybe she'd accidentally tripped over something, taken a nasty fall after she lost her footing, which was a distinct possibility. When the farmer approached Aunt Helena, he did so warily, for he had no way of knowing in her current condition how she would react when she saw him. He said she looked affrighted, disorientated, very confused, like a deer caught in headlights. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked. "You look a little lost. Do you possibly need any help?" "Who are you?" Aunt Helena had asked, throwing her arms around in a defensive gesture and reaching to the forest floor to pick up a stick to defend herself with, which she was waving furiously at the farmer. "Don't come near me! Don't come near me! Get away from me!" she cried warningly. "If you come near me, I'll hurt you with this stick. I promise you, I'll hurt you. I'm warning you. Stay away from me. Stay away from me." "Ma'am," the farmer said,
I have no intention of hurting you. I'm just concerned about your welfare, that's all. I know you're a local, that you live at Strawberry Fields farmhouse that isn't far from here. I know you're a tennis coach as well."
For a moment Aunt Helena was silent as she listened to the farmer's words. She seemed befuddled, and as she stared at the farmer, her forehead became crinkled with puzzle lines. "You know who I am?" she had asked. A light of hope seemed to go on in her eyes, because at that point in time she had no clue who she was, or even what she was doing in the grove.
"Well, put it this way, ma'am. I don't know you personally all that well," the farmer admitted. "But yes, I've seen you around town rather frequently. In fact, I saw you last week in the supermarket queue. Maybe you might remember that. There was some kind of hold-up in the line we were standing in. The woman in front of you in the queue could not find her credit card. She had to empty out her entire bag. Things were flying everywhere, all over the place, lipsticks and you name it. She was very embarrassed. We helped her pick up all her stuff. While we waited for her, we got talking about the excessive cost of living these days. Do you remember any of that?"
Aunt Helena shook her head. "I don't remember. I don't remember any of it. And I don't recognize you at all. I don't think I've ever seen you before a day in my life. You don't look at all familiar to me."
"Well, I recognized you, ma'am, at once, from our encounter last week. You're a very memorable-looking woman. I was worried about you. That's why I stopped. My Land Rover Discovery is parked over there. I hope you don't mind my saying so, ma'am, but you look rather like a fish out of water. Are you sure you're all right? Do you need any help?"
"I don't know," Aunt Helena admitted. "I can't remember why I'm here, nor who I am. I can't remember anything. My memory just seems to have been vanquished." She stared at the farmer with frightened eyes. "Why can't I remember? Why can't I remember?"
"Do you know who the President of the United States is?"
the farmer asked Aunt Helena. She shook her head. "No, I can't say I do, actually."
"Do you know what year it is, ma'am?"
Aunt Helena shook her head again. "I can't remember," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Why can't I remember something as straightforward as that? Is there something wrong with me? Why can't I remember that?"
"Well, maybe, ma'am, you can remember the date of your birth. How old you are, perhaps?" the farmer asked her gently. "When you were born. I'm sure you can remember that."
Aunt Helena shook her head. Her eyes widened in alarm. "What's wrong with me? I can't even remember my birthday. I don't even know how old I am. I think I might have been born in May. It seems to feel right. But I can't remember the date or the year. What's wrong with me? I don't even know my age. How can I not know something as simple and straightforward as that? It makes no sense. What is happening to me?"
"Don't worry, ma'am, about a thing. I'm sure your memory is temporarily impaired, but it'll come back to you."
The farmer described her as looking very agitated. He told my mother that he felt so much compassion for Aunt Helena's obvious vulnerability. She looked rather like a lost, bedraggled kitten, abandoned on the side of the road, that was trying desperately to survive on its own. He told my mum it must have been a hell of a scary to suddenly not even know who you are. He said it would appear that Aunt Helena didn't even know her own name. The farmer had no idea what had happened to Aunt Helena, but he assumed that given there were lots of rocks on that treacherous trail, she must have tripped and fallen over something, and as a consequence had a nasty fall, banging her head against a rock. So as a consequence was suffering from amnesia. He knew that in her current rather precarious condition, she urgently needed to get some medical help, for the doctors to be able to find out what was going on with her, as any head wound always needs serious investigation and immediate attention.
"Look, ma'am," he had told my Aunt Helena, "I think we can establish you've had a fall of some sort," he said to her, his face registering grave concern.
"A fall?" asked Aunt Helena, looking somewhat bemused. What do you mean I must have had a fall?
Well, ma'am, it would easily explain your lapse of memory. You possibly tripped over something on the forest floor. It's treacherous enough in those woods. Maybe you fell over a burgeoning root, hit your head against a rock. There are lots of rocks on that trail, and after the recent rainfall, I wouldn't mind betting some of them are rather slippery. Yes, I can see you've got a bad gash on your head. You're covered in dry blood. It's all over your clothes. You've got yourself scratched up, and there are bruises all over you. Can you at least remember what happened? For a start, how did you get that gash on your head? It looks pretty nasty. At the very least, you're going to need some stitches on that scalp. I can take you to the hospital to get fully examined if you like. You do need to be looked over by a doctor. I think you're possibly concussed from the fall, which is why your memory is somewhat impaired. Maybe you've even sustained some bruising on your brain. You will be in safe hands in the hospital, I am most sure. They will be able to establish what is going on with you. But I can't possibly leave you here on your own in this rather precarious state, ma'am. If you don't want to come with me, I could easily call the emergency services on your behalf, and I'm sure they'll be here in a tick and take you to the hospital themselves.
My rather befuddled aunt placed her fingers on the back of her scalp and examined the blood that came off onto her fingers. "It's blood," she said, staring at the farmer with wide eyes. "You're right. I've been bleeding on my head, and it feels very swollen on this part of my head. I can feel a very big bump over here."
That's right, ma'am. Your head looks rather swollen. You have been bleeding. The gash on your scalp is nasty. It looks like it's going to need stitches at the very least. But at least the blood has dried up and congealed significantly. But my guess is you might have bled out a lot. Are you sure, quite sure that you can't remember what happened?"
"What happened?" said Aunt Helena, looking puzzled again. She stared blankly at the farmer. "What did happen?" she repeated, as if she suddenly thought the farmer might be able to tell her why she was in such a delirious state. She looked at him hopefully, as if he might have the answers she was looking for, that might clear away some of the fog of her confusion.
"I was hoping you'd be able to tell me that yourself. As I was saying, I wonder why you took a fall like that. Can you remember at least why you were in the woods in the first place? Were you taking a stroll, perhaps? Possibly you were going to visit the waterfall there, or swim in one of the rock pools. People often go there to take a dip on a hot summer's day. And let's not kid, it's been hot recently. Can you remember anything at all? Even if you can remember something very small, it might inspire your memory to come bouncing back."
Aunt Helena seemed to think about what the farmer was saying. Finally she conceded. I'm so sorry. I just can't remember anything. I just don't understand why. I just can't."
"So you don't remember even taking a tumble of some kind?"
"Well, I do think I definitely fell. That would explain the big bump on my head. And it's really hurting. I've got a thumping headache."
"I'm not surprised," said the farmer sympathetically. "As I said, a nasty head wound is not going to feel very good. I imagine it's very swollen and sore. Not to worry. You've probably just sustained a concussion. But I'm sure you're going to be as right as rain soon enough. The main thing is we need to get you help, and you mustn't stress about it at all."
"But why can't I remember anything?" Aunt Helena asked the farmer.
"Well, ma'am, as I keep saying to you, you must have a slight concussion. That would explain the absence of your memory. But we'll take you to the hospital, and I would be very happy to do so myself, to get you checked out."
"But I don't know you from a bar of soap," said Aunt Helena. "I've never seen you before a single day in my life. You could be a very dangerous man for all I know."
"Ma'am, I'm not dangerous,"
said the farmer, unable to hide the amusement on his face, as if he found the very idea that Aunt Helena thought that he might be dangerous was hilariously funny.
"If you must know, ma'am, I wouldn't even hurt a fly. Actually, that's not entirely true, the farmer confessed. I absolutely abhor flies. I put traps around the place for them everywhere. They bother the cows and horses all the time. So yes, I'm very guilty of killing a ton of flies. I also kill termites and snails that eat my vegetables. But beyond that, I'm rather a nice guy, actually. My name is Hans Bateman, and I'm called Hans because my mother was German and was determined that I should have a German name.
You kill flies, said Aunt Helena, considering Hans's words. Then she smiled at the farmer triumphantly. I kill flies too. I really abhor them. Nasty, dirty things they are. They spread disease, don't they? I also can't stand mosquitoes of any kind. Aunt Helena suddenly seemed terribly pleased with herself, that she finally remembered something about herself, and she knew she hated mosquitoes, and that in itself seemed like a promising start.
There you go, ma'am, said Hans. We have more in common than you know.
Are you married, Hans? My Aunt Helena asked him.
No, I'm not. My wife, I'm afraid, died of breast cancer 3 years ago. Terrible tragedy it was, but it's one of those things. What about you, ma'am? Are you married?
That's a good question, of which I don't know the answer to. I can't remember. Can you believe that? I was actually hoping that you might know. If I was married, I mean. You say you've seen me around before. Maybe you've seen me with a man in town. I'm not wearing a ring on my finger. If I was married, surely I'd be wearing a ring.
Well, then maybe you're not married, ma'am, because you're not wearing a ring. And I have seen you around town before, and you've always been on your own, or sometimes with another woman that looks a lot like you, so I think she might be your sister or something. As I was saying, ma'am, before we change the subject of conversation, I don't mean to repeat myself, but I'm worried you might already have forgotten what I was saying. But we need to do something about that head wound of yours. I'd like to call the emergency services on your behalf, if I may. I'm quite happy to stay with you while we wait for them to arrive. They can take you to the hospital. It really is no skin off my nose. What way you want to do things. My only concern for you, ma'am, is to get you to safety. I'm extremely worried about your well-being. You need that wound of yours investigated to make sure nothing more serious is going on with you. Head injuries can be notoriously unpredictable, and my guess is, judging by your current state, you do need immediate attention.
I need to see a doctor, said Aunt Helena.
You do, ma'am, Hans assured her. Why don't you come with me if you don't want to go with the emergency services? I can take you very quickly to the hospital.
Aunt Helena studied the farmer. Finally she nodded her head in agreement. Well, you look like a good man. I think I can trust you. I do think I'm a good judge of character, even though I can't remember very much about myself. And you do say you hate flies. So I guess we're on the same page. Hans was surprised that Aunt Helena had willingly agreed for him to take her to hospital in his Land Rover Discovery, and he wasted no time in getting her there before she changed her mind. He said my aunt was quite reflective during the drive, complaining that she didn't even recognize the scenery, that everything looked strange and unfamiliar to her, and that in itself seemed to scare her exponentially. When she arrived at the hospital, as luck would have it, one of the local nurses, a lovely young lady called Susan, who was on duty, knew my Aunt Helena very well. She claimed Aunt Helena had given her tennis lessons every Saturday morning the previous summer. She said Aunt Helena had taught her to play a mean game of tennis. She also said that Aunt Helena was not married, but she had a sister called Bridget, who had a son. She said that she had taken tennis lessons on Bridget's extensive property, which had ample tennis courts. So that was why my mother, thanks to this nurse called Susan, was immediately notified of Aunt Helena's enigmatic condition, that had certainly aroused much curiosity and speculation among the nursing staff and doctors at the hospital. who could not fathom how my aunt had sustained such an injury. My mother informed the doctors that Aunt Helena taught tennis on the tennis courts at our property, and on a hot summer's day, after teaching tennis, she'd regularly ride her mountain bike down the woodland trail in the woods, where she'd take a dip in one of the rock pools there. It turned out that that is what she must have done, as my mother went to check the rock pool and found Aunt Helena's bicycle propped up under a tree and her wet swimming costume rolled up tightly in a towel that was left in the bicycle basket. The wet costume simply suggested that Aunt Helena had enjoyed a swim, changed her clothes, and it was when her swim was over that something must have happened to her that had resulted in her acquiring the mysterious injury. Aunt Helena was a lot like my own mother Bridget. Both of them were outdoorsy sort of people. They loved to take walks and bicycle rides and enjoy all kinds of outdoor pursuits. So what had happened to her on that unassuming day invited more questions than answers, and of course a whole lot of speculation. My mother had rushed to the hospital with me at her side. She couldn't find a babysitter at the last minute, and as my dad was flying a millionaire client to a private island, he couldn't be roped in to look after me. So I was dragged along to the hospital. I didn't mind a bit. I was extremely worried about my aunt's condition and wanted to see her for myself. I remember when I first laid eyes on Aunt Helena in hospital, I discovered she was in a right state. The nurses were trying to clean up her injuries. They mopped up some of her superficial scratches, grazes and bruises with antiseptic lotion. Aunt Helena complained bitterly that it hurt. The doctors couldn't fathom how it was that my aunt was also covered in scratches and bruises. If she had fallen over and hit her head, that was one thing, but it certainly did not explain how she acquired so many bruises and scratches all over her body, which only made the mystery of what had happened to her all the more baffling. "Helena! Oh, goodness gracious, I've been so worried!" cried my mother, on seeing my aunt propped up in her hospital bed against a pile of feathery pillows. Aunt Helena looked bemused, rather glassy-eyed, and barely even noticed my mother. "I was so terrified that something dreadful had happened to you. Oh, my word! Look at you! You gave me quite the shock, you did. I'm so glad you're all right, and that at least you're compos mentis," said my mother, rushing forward to Aunt Helena and impulsively throwing her arms around Aunt Helena. Aunt Helena's eyes grew wide and almost hostile. "I don't know who you are," she cried out indignantly. She pushed my mother away from her. "You're hurting me, really hurting me. Can't you see I've got bruises all over my body? You're squeezing me hard. Get away from me, will you?" "Better not touch her, ma'am," the nurse suggested kindly to my mother. "Sorry, and you are?" "I'm Helena's sister," my mother said. "I'm Bridget Stevenson. This is my son Hunter. He's 10 years old. We're here to see Helena. We got a call from the hospital telling us she had acquired some kind of a head injury and appears to have memory problems. We've been so worried about her condition, but at least she's up and about." "I'm afraid she does have a head wound," the nurse admitted. "Helena's a little confused at the moment." Aunt Helena looked at my mother with wide, disbelieving eyes. "A sister?" she said, shaking her head vigorously. "I don't have a sister. I would remember something like that, I'm most sure. She's lying, nurse. Tell her to go away. She is not my sister." At this my mother looked grievously upset. It was a shock to hear Aunt Helena talking like this. My mother managed a half-hearted smile. "I am your sister Helena. We're very close, you and I. We both teach tennis together at my house on our tennis courts. We're always seeing each other every single day of the week. And if you don't remember, this is your nephew Hunter. Surely you remember him at the very least." "Why are you lying?" said Aunt Helena. "I don't know who you are. I would remember if I had a sister or a nephew. You don't look remotely familiar to me. Go away. Nurse, please tell this dreadful woman to go away. I don't know her from Adam. I don't want her here in the ward with me spitting out all these outrageous lies. I don't know why she wants to pretend to be my sister. But I certainly don't want to be around a woman like her." The nurse gently guided us out of the hospital ward. She told us in a low, encouraging voice not to get too unduly alarmed, as when people lost their memories, their behaviour could become erratic at times. "Don't worry, Mrs. Stevenson. Don't take it to heart. I know it's distressing, your sister being so indifferent and aloof. But don't take offence to this. I'm sure when the bruising on her brain has subsided, or whatever it is that has caused her amnesia, she'll remember you soon enough. You go home, Mrs. Stevenson, for a couple of hours or so, and come back, and maybe your sister will be a bit more obliging then. I'll keep you updated on her progress. You can visit her as often as you like." My mother nodded. "That's very kind of you. I think I will come back in an hour or so to see how she's doing." She had held my hand, and we trailed across the car park towards our parking space. And once my mother had climbed in the car and settled in her seat, she burst into tears. It had really distressed her, seeing Aunt Helena so disorientated and so obviously confused. I think she was secretly worried that Aunt Helena might never remember who she was. "I'm so sorry. Look at me, Hunter. I do apologize. I'm being so silly. None of this is your aunt's fault, and I'm just overreacting to everything. The nurse is absolutely right. I'm sure your Aunt Helena will remember me soon enough." "Mum, you mustn't get so upset about it. I'm sure she will remember us soon." "I hope she does, love, and I'm sure she will. It's just so upsetting, isn't it, seeing your Aunt Helena in such a dreadful condition? I can't believe this has happened to her. It's such a nightmare." I hated to see my mother so grievously upset. We did, of course, visit Aunt Helena a couple more times that day, and on one occasion she mistakenly mistook my mother for a nurse. "Oh, nurse, I wondered how long it would take you to get here. I'm hungry. I haven't eaten anything all day." It turned out that my mother had eaten only minutes before. How could she have forgotten that already? The doctors had told me and my mother that there was no point in hanging around at the hospital, that we needed to go home and relax, and that they would be shortly in touch with us to tell us the result of my aunt's scans. The rest of the day my mother walked around the house on tenterhooks. She was like a wild, untamed animal in a zoo enclosure, going up and down in circles. It was absolutely exhausting to watch her in this state. When the phone rang, my mother almost jumped out of her skin. She looked at me, held her breath, and hurriedly dashed over to the landline to answer it. "Hello, hello." She listened to the other caller on the other side and said, "But are you sure? What do you mean gone? What on earth do you mean gone? How can that be?" When she put down the receiver, she looked agitated and distressed, rather like a deer caught in headlights, as if she didn't know quite how to react. For a moment she seemed lost for words, as if her tongue was tied. She began to hold her heart with her hand, as if she thought she was about to have a heart attack and crumple over on the floor. Whatever my mother had been told, the news was not good. Or why would she react so dramatically to what she'd heard on the phone? For a moment her eyes rolled in the back of her head, and in that second I thought she was going to pass out and fall over. "Mum!" I said, running over to her. "Are you all right? You looked as if you were about to faint. It's Aunt Helena, isn't it? Is Aunt Helena all right? She's not dead, is she? Please don't say she's dead, Mummy. She's not dead, is she?" I asked. My mother was breathing heavily. She looked at me through wide eyes. She began to suddenly regain her composure, as if she suddenly realized that she was causing me a great deal of disquiet. "Oh, I'm so sorry to scare you, love. I did almost faint, goodness gracious me. It's been quite the day, that's all. One shock after another. That phone call wasn't the hospital. It wasn't about your Aunt Helena," my mother said. She held me close to her. I could smell her apple shampoo. "I'm quite sure you've got nothing to worry about and that Aunt Helena is doing fine. Where on earth did you get that dreadful idea that she might be dead? Goodness gracious me, love. You saw her earlier on in the hospital, and granted she's a little dazed and a bit confused, but she's not going to die, that's for sure. Don't get any ideas like that. But I thought she was dead, Mummy, because I heard you say on the phone, "What do you mean gone?" I thought you were saying that Aunt Helena might have gone. I thought that maybe she'd wandered off in a daze because she's so confused, or that she died in bed, like Max did when he died in the azalea bush. Honestly, love, listen to yourself. You do allow your imagination to go into overdrive at times. What am I going to do with you? You're incorrigible, love. No, your Aunt Helena is doing fine, I'm most sure. But as you know, her memory is impaired. But I'm sure we'll get her back soon enough. The doctors are reasonably optimistic about her condition. But if Aunt Helena is all right, then why are you so upset, Mummy? You looked as if you were going to have a heart attack. Well, I told you, love, that it wasn't the hospital that called, did I not? Unfortunately, it was airport control that phoned me. What do you mean, airport control phoned you? Is Daddy all right? Well, that's it, love. I really don't know the answer to that question. We can only hope. Your father was flying over the Bermuda Triangle, on the way back from dropping off a client and an entourage of his friends to his privately owned island. On your father's return flight, he was the only one in that plane, and it went inexplicably missing on the radar. They can't currently locate the flight. That's why they phoned me. They're keeping me updated and informed. What do you mean, Mummy? Why has Daddy's flight gone missing? I don't understand. It just means, love, they can't locate the whereabouts of your father's plane, said my mother. We have to hope and pray he's going to be all right. I'm sure they will pick up the signal soon enough. As I was telling you, they're keeping me updated all the time. I tell you what, love, how about you go and get us a big glass of Coca-Cola each, with lots and lots of ice? I don't know about you, but I fancy something very fizzy and sweet to drink, because I've had a bit of a shock and so have you. I knew my mother was using that ploy to get me away from the telephone, as I sneakily suspected that the moment my back was turned, she would likely be phoning her mother to tell her the news. I nodded my head obligingly and agreed to get us both glasses of sweet Coca-Cola, but I sneakily eavesdropped on the conversation that my mother was having with my grandmother by picking up the receiver in the kitchen as stealthily as I could, hoping with all my heart that my mother wouldn't hear the click on the other end of the receiver. I knew something bad must have happened to my father. I didn't want my mother keeping anything from me, and I suspected she was not being forthcoming with all the information. I wanted to hear it all. At 10 years old, I might have been young, but I deserved to know exactly what was going on. "Hello, dear. This is a surprise," came my grandmother's voice. "I didn't expect you to call. How are you doing, love?" "Oh, Mum, I just don't know how to start." "Oh, goodness gracious me, love. You sound distraught. Is everything all right? You're not worried about Helena, are you? I've only just come back from the hospital, you know. You'll be very glad to know I've got an update, and it's good news. Dr. Levine believes that the amnesia is due to some bad bruising on her brain. They believe when the swelling comes down that Helena will regain her memory. And even if she doesn't, love, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. There is no reason for you to get so distraught about this. There are also ways of helping people remember. There are photographs, stuff like that. And that's what we will embrace if the worst comes to the worst. As Dr. Levine says, we need to take each day one step at a time. There's no need for us to concern ourselves too much at this stage. Time is a healer, love. We must just exercise some patience, that's all, love. Many patients after suffering a bout of amnesia go on to make a full and swift recovery. The nurse told me that you visited the hospital several times this afternoon. She said you were in quite the state, because Helena literally threw you out the first time you visited, claiming that you were lying that she was your sister. She says that caused you undue upset. Is that really necessary, love? You shouldn't be taking this personally. Amnesia does a lot to your brain. It can make people behave rather strangely. I know how desperately close the two of you are. But honestly, love, you shouldn't let this get you down. You sound very, very distressed, and I'm extremely worried about you. I think I'm more worried about you than Helena. I've never known you to be so inconsolable with grief like this. I can hear it in your voice. Anyway, when it comes to Helena, I simply can't understand where that sister of yours got that head wound from. Honestly, why does she keep going to those rock pools? And especially since we had so much rain recently. One of those rocks was probably so slippery she fell and hit her head. That is what must have happened. It just doesn't bear thinking about. Your sister gave a tennis lesson to a young lady, and then walked off in a huff, as you said. She took her bicycle and rode to the woodgrove, where she went to swim at the rock pools. You weren't going to see her until the following morning because you had no more tennis lessons to give. And so goodness knows, she could have been in that woodgrove all night, and no one would have known the better. Thank goodness the farmer found her, in quite the state he did. I'm just so grateful for him. I really am. God forbid she's still wandering around those woods. It just does not bear thinking about at all. Mum, why is it when one thing goes wrong, everything goes wrong at the very same time? It's so damn unfair. I can't believe this is happening. First it was Max dying, then it's Helena not remembering a bloody thing, and being found wandering around the woodgrove in a complete daze, after a tennis lesson she gave. My mother started to burst into tears, and for a while you could hear her sobbing down the phone. I was alarmed to hear my mother so decidedly distressed. My grandmother was very quiet for a moment, and in her very soft voice I heard her say, "Bridget, spit it out. This isn't all about Helena, is it? It's something else going on. It's not just your sister. You're scaring me. What happened? Please, God, Hunter's all right, is he? Nothing's happened to my favourite grandson. Please, no." "Hunter's fine, Mum. I'm not talking about him. It's Anton." "What about Anton, love? Your husband is all right, I hope." "Mum, his plane has gone missing. It's vanished from the radar. Completely vanished. They can't see it anywhere." "What do you mean, love, his plane has gone missing? What are you saying?" "Mum, I'm saying that his plane has gone missing on the radar. What if he's dead? What if I've lost Anton? What if I never see my husband again? What if I have to raise Hunter without any help, without his father? He's so broken already about losing Max. Now his aunt doesn't know what day of the week it is, let alone her own name. And now his father's plane has gone missing. I'm so terrified, Mum, absolutely terrified. I don't know what to do with myself. Planes don't go missing, do they? He must have crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. He could be dead, even as I speak. Oh, my God, Mum, he could be dead." "You don't know that for sure, love. You really mustn't panic like this. You're going to have a heart attack if you continue like this. Where did you say he was flying to? I thought he was staying with you for the weekend." "No, he was, but he changed his mind at the last minute, because he was dropping off some rich multimillionaire to his private island. I didn't want him to go. It was a last-minute thing. The millionaire decided he fancied a break. These rich people, Mum, they make me sick. They think they can click their fingers at you and you'll come running at a moment's notice. It's pathetic. And you know what Anton's like. He agreed to fly this rich man on his private jet to the island, and on the way back his plane just vanished from the radar. He flew over the Bermuda Triangle. His signal vanished. They say they're not getting a signal at all, but they'll keep me posted. There is no way this is good news, Mum. Nothing good can come from this. I have to prepare myself for the very worst, don't I? What if Anton's dead? What if his body, worse still, is never recovered? What the hell do I tell Hunter? He's so broken up and vulnerable at the moment, especially after Max's death. And he was very distressed to learn about Aunt Helena's bizarre condition. A while ago he thought that she must have died in hospital. And now this has happened to his own father. It never rains, it pours. I feel as if the whole world is collapsing in on my head. What am I going to do, Mum? I'm scared half to death. Sweetheart, listen to yourself. You're being neurotic. You need to calm down and keep your head on your shoulders, and firmly so. The good news is there is no good news yet. I do know they say there are stories about the Bermuda Triangle, where planes go disappearing, never to be seen again. But I'm sure that has not happened to your Anton. I'm quite sure of it. Anton's flown over the Bermuda Triangle hundreds of times, Mum. Nothing like this has ever happened to him. Now there's no sign of his plane. I asked airport control if Anton had reported any trouble while flying the plane. They said he was in good spirits one moment, and then there was no communication with him the next. So nothing makes any sense, does it? Sweetheart, you don't know what has happened. I keep reiterating this, and you must listen. You must keep your head firmly on your shoulders. You mustn't jump to any wild conclusions like you did with your sister. You always fear the worst. You're quite an alarmist. You need to be positive and very stoic for Hunter's sake. You know what they say. No news is good news, and I firmly believe that. I'm sure everything is going to be absolutely fine. You're taking up all this valuable time talking to me. For all you know, airport control might desperately be trying to get hold of you right now to give you great news. Maybe they've already spotted your husband's plane on the radar. I've got very good instincts about things. I'm sure if anything untoward had happened to Anton, I'd feel it in my gut. I've always been very intuitive like that. Look, love, I will be praying for Anton. Sometimes a plane can drop lower than the signal, which means they can't always be picked up on radar. I know that happens. Anton even told me about it. Maybe he had to fly low for some reason. So don't get too unduly alarmed yet. I'm sure they'll spot his plane soon enough. He didn't report anything untoward happening in his plane, so there's no point in getting alarmed yet. But, Mum, don't you get it? When you've lost a signal, you've lost a plane. That can only mean one thing. Anton's plane has gone down, possibly in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. He could be dead, Mum. What about poor Hunter? He won't have a father. Why is this all happening, all at the same time? All this anguish. I can't take it. It's too much. Pull yourself together, love. You really need to. You can't break down like this. You have Hunter to consider. He needs his mother to be strong for him. Your breaking down is going to be very distressing for him. You do need to hold it together, love. We need to end this call right now so you can wait for news from airport control. Even as I speak, they could be trying to get through to you. When my mother put down the receiver and ended her call with my grandmother, I hurriedly ran into the hallway. My mother stood by the hall table, staring down at the telephone rather blankly. Her face had grown completely white, and her whole body was trembling and shaking. "Mummy! Mummy!" I said. "Is Daddy going to be all right?" "You told Granny he might have crashed into the ocean. You said he might be dead, like Max." This time I was the one that burst into tears. "Daddy isn't dead, is he, Mum? What if his plane is at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean? What if he can't breathe?" My mum ran forwards towards me, dropping to her knees. She draped me in a curtain of her love. "You heard me speaking to your grandmother on the kitchen phone, didn't you? You listened in to our call. That was naughty of you, Hunter. You shouldn't have done that. I was speaking to your grandmother about adult things that I don't want little children like yourself to overhear." "I'm a big boy, Mummy. I don't want you keeping secrets from me." "You're right, love. It's not good to keep secrets. It's best to know what's going on. Don't get upset, love. It's too premature to get overwrought at this stage, as your grandmother wisely pointed out to me.
If your father was flying his plane low over the Atlantic Ocean, he might not have been spotted on the radar. That is a possibility. We don't know anything at all. They're saying there aren't any signals at the moment, or any communication from your father. They can't locate his plane. But that could change, so we mustn't despair at this stage. You heard your grandmother. She said no news is good news, and she's right about that. We need to keep our fingers crossed and pray for the very best. But what if Daddy's plane fell out of the sky and dropped into the ocean? He could be dead like Max, and no one will be able to wake him up. Remember, we couldn't wake up Max, could we? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, my mother said, leaning forward towards me and wiping away a tear with a tissue she was holding. I could see she was desperately trying to compose herself for my sake, but she did not succeed in disguising her obvious anguish. We both jumped out of our skins when the landline finally began to ring. My mother looked like a frightened rabbit, too scared to answer the phone, as if she'd spotted a poisonous tree frog in beautiful colours that she longed to touch, but was desperately afraid it would ultimately kill her if she did. I couldn't blame her for her obvious reluctance to answer the phone, for the fear of bad news it might present. Finally, my mother found her courage. She drew in a deep breath and answered the telephone. At 10 years old, I stood there very stoically, with my eyes directly pinned on my mother, my heart pounding violently in my chest, as I watched every reaction on my mother's part, as she spoke to the caller very solemnly. I knew by my mother's expressions, which I could read very well like the back of my own hand, whether the news would be good or bad. The tension in the air was so palpable, you could have almost cut it with a knife. My little head was screaming, "Please, God, may Daddy be okay? I'll do anything you want, I promise. If Daddy's all right, I mean. I'll pray 100 times a day, more if I have to, God. And I promise I'll never ever take any cookies from the jar without asking first." I was to learn later that people in dire situations such as ours very often negotiate with God when the life of a loved one is precariously hanging in the balance. And I think on that day God did answer my prayers with the efficiency of a dart heading straight for the bullseye on a board. "Hello," came my mother's tentative voice. "Yes, it is Mrs. Stevenson speaking. That's right. Is that airport control? Oh, good. I'm so glad to have you on the line. Have you heard any news from my husband yet?" "What? You're kidding. You found a signal. You picked up my husband's plane. Goodness, that's incredible. Do you know why you lost the signal in the first place?" "Oh, that is extraordinary, isn't it?" "Yes, it is quite a mystery. Very enigmatic. I mean, he was flying over the Bermuda Triangle of all things, and then this happens. Yes, it does make you wonder about stories you hear, doesn't it? I never paid them much attention myself, but now it makes me wonder. You've never seen this before, except when a plane goes down or flying too low. Oh, I do feel relieved, yes I do. It's almost as if I've got my life back. My son is standing by me on the phone. He looks so happy to know that his father's all right." "Does my husband know why he lost a signal?" "He doesn't. That's very strange indeed. But thank you so much for getting in touch so quickly. Yes, I feel as if I can breathe again. It's good news all round. I never expected this. Thank you so very much for calling." My mother began to jump up and down. Once she'd finally put the receiver down, she ran towards me and flung her arms around me, and then began to throw me up and down as if I was a frisbee. I'd never been so happy. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but these were tears of relief. In that moment I knew everything was going to be all right. My father was not dead, and that was the best news I could ever have received. In that quintessential moment, as a 10-year-old boy, I became poignantly aware of the extreme fragility of life. It really scared me, but it also made me truly appreciate those that I loved all the more. I could barely wait for my father to return home. I would tell him how much I loved him,
And up until then, I hadn't actually been very good at doing that, because I'd always been rather shy in that regard. But this time things were extremely different, and I was going to tell him how much I loved him and shout it from the rooftops if I could. Let's just say when my father did return home, he didn't look any worse for wear from his trip, other than being rather fatigued. He naturally received a rapturous welcome from me and my mother. I think it overwhelmed him a little. He wasn't used to being so enthusiastically welcomed back into the house. "I thought we had lost you," my mother cried out. My father just smiled and said, "Don't be ridiculous. Of course you haven't lost me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, aren't I? Unfortunately, the two of you are stuck with me, warts and all, I'm afraid." Me and my mother did happen to notice that there was something profoundly different about my father, as if something was preying heavily on his mind. But whatever it was, he wasn't willing to share it with us. But it was so subtle. If we hadn't known my father so well as we did, we probably wouldn't have noticed such a change in his demeanour at all. "I'm very sorry you both had such a fright," he told us. "Fright? Is that all you can say, Anton? That's an understatement, let me tell you. We've been going through hell and back worrying about you," said my mother, sounding exasperated. "We thought we had lost you for good, Anton. I thought you'd crashed your plane in the Atlantic Ocean, and that the ocean had swallowed you alive. I don't know what we'd have done if you hadn't returned home safely. What with Max dying, my sister's memory hanging on its hinges so fragilely, and then your plane going missing. I personally thought I was going to have an emotional breakdown. Thank goodness my mother managed to talk some sense into me, reassuring me that no news is good news. What happened? How on earth did your plane lose signal like that?" My father shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly. He simply shook his head. My mother described him as being extremely evasive, as if he was clandestinely nursing a secret that he didn't want to share with anyone. My mother even told my grandmother, this in another conversation over the phone, that I happened to overhear. I know exactly what you're thinking about me. And I confess that at 10 I was quite the little eavesdropper. But I had no siblings, and so I very much enjoyed listening to adult conversations, as I hated being kept in the dark about anything. When my mother was on the phone to my grandmother, I quickly picked up the receiver in the kitchen. I could hear the click on the telephone, but my mother didn't. Otherwise she'd have shouted down the phone to tell me to get off the line at once, but she didn't. I was lucky to be able to catch the gist of the conversation. "Ma'am, I'm telling you, something very strange happened to Anton on his flight over the Bermuda Triangle. I know it did. I can feel it in my bones. But he's simply refusing to talk about it or open up at all. When I asked him why his plane lost signal and why he was unable to communicate with airport control, he said he didn't realize that any of this was happening. He didn't answer my questions. He became annoyingly vague. I'm telling you, getting him to open up at all, Mum, is like trying to prise open a rock-hard oyster shell that refuses to budge. I think the experience, whatever it is, shook him to the core. I really believe that. I know his plane did not fly below radar. So why was there no signal, Mum? Can you explain that? I just can't get my head around all this. It's a baffling mystery. You know what Anton's like. He doesn't believe in anything paradoxical. And so if something weird happened to him that he couldn't explain, he's probably waging an internal war about it, trying to persuade himself it never happened, as it goes against his resolute beliefs about this world. But whatever happened to him on that flight over the Bermuda Triangle, I do have a sense it must have been quite profound. There are moments when I notice that Anton has a faraway look on his face. I've never witnessed that before on him, you know. He's the kind of man that lives in the moment. But now I regularly catch him daydreaming. Goodness gracious, love, that is unusual for him. Very odd behaviour on his part. But you have to admit, 1 minute the plane vanishes and then it reappears. All I can say, love, is thank goodness it reappeared. There have been many paradoxical cases like this in the history books, where planes over the Bermuda Triangle have gone missing and never been found again. All I can say is we can thank our lucky stars that Anton is safe and well and back home with the both of you, and that's what counts at the end of the day. You say he looks as if his mind is miles away. But does he seem particularly different to you? Personality-wise, I mean, my grandmother asked. Well, yes, Mum. Now you come to mention it, he does seem rather different. He's still himself, of course, but softer, more gentle. And he's been particularly kind towards Hunter, very considerate. Come to think of it, he's less in my face these days, if you know what I mean. He's been circumspect and reflective. And this daydreaming, well, it's very bizarre. I was talking to him the other day. He didn't even hear me. He failed to acknowledge me. Finally, he looked at me and said, "What were you saying?" He's been so distracted, Mum. I'd never seen him like this before. When I told him that my sister Helena had lost her memory and that she was moving in with us for a while until she got back on her feet, he said to me, "Helena who?" I said to him, "Anton, I'm talking about my sister Helena. Remember I told you she had a gash on her head. I told you she took a fall at the rock pools, where a farmer found her wandering around in a dazed state. She's been in hospital. She's making excellent progress, but her memory has been impaired. But every day she's remembering a little more, so she's well on the mend. Dr. Levine believes she needs to move in with us for a while until she finally recovers her memory. But her prognosis is very good. Dr. Levine says once the swelling has gone down, he's optimistic that Helena will make a full and very good recovery." Ma'am, when I told Anton all this, he looked at me blankly and then said, "Well, that's very good news, isn't it? I had no idea Helena took a fall. Why didn't you tell me about this? I didn't know she had lost her memory. What a dreadful thing to happen. You should go and visit her in hospital. Buy her some flowers to cheer her up." "Ma'am, I can't tell you how many times I told him about her condition. Half a dozen times it must have been. And I've told him that I've visited her several times at the hospital. But it did not sink in. It's like Anton has not listened to me or heard a word of what I've been saying since he got back from that flight. He's usually so much on the ball. But sometimes I feel as if he's in another world, because he doesn't appear to be paying attention to what's going on around him, as if he's caught up in his own little bubble." "Interesting, very interesting," said my grandmother. "If I didn't know any better, I'd say that he was also suffering an impaired memory like Helena. But I don't think that is what's going on here." "You don't, Mum?" "Of course I don't, love. Goodness gracious me, that is not what's happening. We've both deduced that something happened to him when he flew over the Bermuda Triangle. Something very strange. Whatever that was, it is clearly occupying his undivided attention. My guess is he's just not fully engaged in his current reality, or what's going on around him. Probably because he's so caught up with what did happen to him on that plane. He's refusing to talk about it, that's very obvious. I think we can establish that something did happen to him. But what it was, I'm not sure we will ever know. We know what Anton's like. He can be like a closed book at the very best of times, and if he doesn't want to talk about something, then we won't get anything out of him at all. I wish I could see what was going on in his head. By all accounts, the stories I've heard over the years about the Bermuda Triangle have always been fascinating. But your husband has been flying over the triangle for quite a long time, without any incident, and then the plane loses signal without explanation, and miraculously disappears off the radar, and then reappears again. Furthermore, what you're telling me about his behaviour is very peculiar. He's definitely hiding something, love. And you say he's so distracted. Well, that is revelatory, if you ask me." "Those are my thoughts exactly, Mum. You've echoed everything that I've been thinking of late." "Well, sweetheart, all I can say is if it were me, I would drill him a lot more. I wouldn't give him a minute's peace until he told me the truth. That's what I would do if it were your father. Yes, Mum, but Anton is not like my father. He's not forthcoming when he doesn't want to be. He simply told me that he couldn't understand how the plane had lost signal, and that's that. Apparently everything was just fine. But I don't believe a word of it, Mum. I know he's hiding something, and I wish to God I knew what it was. Look, love, maybe when he's thought about things a little more, and he's meditated on what has happened to him, maybe then he'll talk about it. Once he's made sense of everything, perhaps. Just on changing the subject for a second, love, are you absolutely sure you're going to manage looking after Helena at your home? I could move in if you like to help you out. I know you've been through so much drama of late. You're absolutely exhausted and overwhelmed, and on top of it all you've got tennis classes to teach. I'd really be happy to help out if I may. Make myself useful, even if it means keeping Hunter busy for a while. Not to worry, Mum. Helena's beginning to remember a few things. I think we're going to be fine. We're going to get there slowly and surely. I've got a good feeling we're getting Helena back, and I think I can manage on my own. But if I am struggling, I will take full advantage of your offer. We'll make sure you do, love. Just remember I'm here whenever you need me. We'll do so, Mum. Anton Stevenson. I've always been the kind of person that believes only in the things that I can physically see with my naked eye. I was a bit of a science and math geek when I was at school. I was useless at anything that involved applying my imagination, or an injection of any particular kind of inspirational creativity. I do even recall my English teacher at school describing my essays that I wrote as being so uninspiring that it would have been preferable to watch paint dry, because they were so dreadfully dull. For some reason I could never tap into my imagination. Looking back, I don't think I've been the best father to my son Hunter or my wife Bridget. I've been a bit of a Scrooge over the years, taking the fun out of Christmas for little Hunter by telling him that no Father Christmas doesn't exist and that no Max, our family dog, had not gone to heaven. I resolutely believed in saying it as I believed it to be, because I arrogantly assumed I knew it all. I didn't want any child of mine to be deluded. More fool me. It would seem this stinky attitude of mine went down with my wife Bridget like a lead balloon, for she reprimanded me on many occasions for robbing Hunter of his childlike imagination. I admit that I would find myself feeling exceedingly irritated with my wife Bridget, reading fictional stories all the time and watching movies on television. I thought such frivolous, indulgent entertainment and fancies were a complete waste of time, and that she was filling her mind with cotton wool. It all seemed dreadfully nonsensical to me not to be focusing on anything that was real. I could not understand for the life of me why she wasn't reading something of real substance, like the National Geographic, or watching the History Channel on television, perhaps. But no, she liked all this light-hearted stuff. I didn't appreciate at the time that we are all so different. I was trying to mould both my son Hunter and my wife Bridget to become exactly like me. The reality is, why on earth would I want to do something like that? If my wife Bridget were like me, it would be tiresome to be married to her. Actually, I would loathe to be married to myself. I couldn't imagine a worser fate. I don't exactly consider myself all that fun to hang around. In truth, I don't know exactly what my wife Bridget ever saw in me in the first place. I know I'm extremely lucky to be married to the likes of her, and having her in my life is a very, very good thing. She's a wonderful woman who has always been my anchor, and besides all that, she's an excellent mother to my son Hunter, and I couldn't imagine my life without the both of them in it. For a long time I never believed in God, or any kind of higher power watching over us, as my short-sighted, very limited paradigm of the world as it is was so contained in a perfectly upholstered bubble of my own making. But that was all about to significantly change when I took a routine flight over the Bermuda Triangle. Looking back, I'm inclined to believe that if there is a God, whoever he is, he must have a jolly good sense of humour. for he was about to show me that our world is not what we think it is, and there is so much more than we can ever imagine. Little did I know that I would go through a kaleidoscope of paradoxically outlandish experiences that would ultimately shift my view of reality for good. And one of those cryptid experiences would involve my wife's sister Helena, who lives on her own in a similar style farmhouse to ours. But unlike Bridget, Helena has never married. For me personally, it was more convenient from a work perspective for us to live as a family in Miami, but that was never going to happen. My wife Bridget was practically joined at the hip to her sister Helena, almost as if they were non-identical twins. When I married my wife Bridget, she told me in no uncertain terms that not only was I marrying her, but her entire family as well, and that she wanted to live in a quiet rural community. And that, for me, seemed like a small price to pay, if it meant that Bridget would agree to be my wife. "I love my sister Helena so much," she told me in no uncertain terms. "I have to live close by her, and my mother as well, so I can see her every day." My wife and her sister are both tennis coaches, very good ones, I may add. They share similar passions, but Helena is, without wishing to sound rather rude, a lot more absent-minded than my wife is, with an inclination to be extremely forgetful at times, whereas my wife has a memory on her like an elephant, and forgets absolutely nothing. Sometimes to my peril, I'm afraid to say, as she never forgets significant dates, and once, I hasten to say, when I forgot her birthday. Well, let's just say I'd rather not go there, but if you're a man listening to this, you get where I'm going with this. I had to make up for my forgetfulness in leaps and bounds, with chocolates and flowers and plenty of special dinners out. But I was in the doghouse for quite some time after that, before Bridget finally had the goodness of heart to forgive me. I will admit, even to look at, Helena bears an uncanny resemblance to my wife. Shoulder-length, dark bobbed hair, shiny and healthy looking, perfect fair unblemished skin, hazelnut eyes that in certain lights almost become green. Both have petite athletic physiques, as you would expect with women who exercise a lot, and spend all of their time on the tennis court teaching students to play good games of tennis. Many folk around town assume that my wife and her sister were non-identical twins, because they are so insanely alike. When I married Bridget, I was used to the fact that Helena would be around the place a lot, as the two women were so inseparable, and practically living in each other's pockets. They do everything together. And when I took my family on vacation, yes, you've guessed it, Helena would come along too for the ride. So yes, she became a beloved member of my family, and even I enjoyed having her around. And as for my son Hunter, he loved the bones of his Aunt Helena. If the truth be told, I do rather suspect that Hunter sometimes believes he has two mothers. He's grown very close to his Aunt Helena. So when she ended up getting amnesia, after developing a strange gash to her head, after taking a routine bicycle ride through the woods to enjoy a swim at her favourite haunt, the rock pools, it would seem her fortuitous accident upset Hunter very much. I think after losing our beloved family pet dog, Max, that my son was now worried that everyone around him might suddenly just pop their clogs and die. So I guess when he thought my plane might have disappeared into the Atlantic Ocean, it must have brought the poor boy so much distress. But unlike me, Hunter has quite the imagination on him, which I expect he gets from his mother. Let's just say at the very best of times, young children can be impressionable, and Hunter was hit hard by our 18-year-old Weimarana's death, and for so many bad things to happen all at once was not easy for my son to have to endure. Little did I know when that landline rang on that Friday morning that call would ultimately change the whole trajectory of my life in ways I never envisaged possible. At the inopportune time of the phone call, my family, including my wife's sister Helena, was looking extremely forward to enjoying the weekend together as a family. The call was from a millionaire client of mine, who owns his own private island. Yes, there are people out there so incredibly wealthy that they buy their own islands, as ridiculous as that may sound. The man had impulsively decided to spend a few days on his private island, and was asking me to fly his private jet for him at the very last minute. Let's just say I don't like impulsive arrangements like this from some of the most fickle millionaire clients, who can be as temperamental as the weather itself. I'm afraid to say many of them have this rather self-entitled attitude. They think if they simply click their fingers at you that you'll come running. Sometimes a ubiquitous amount of wealth can bring out the very worst in a person. Believe me, I've witnessed that on far too many occasions. Another thing I've also observed is that people who have a whole lot of money never seem to have enough, no matter how insanely wealthy they become. It would seem having a bank account that gets steadily fatter by the second brings them unparalleled pleasure. Having said that, to be fair, I have worked for some men, or very wealthy people if you like, who have been very generous and considerate. So you can't even typecast the millionaire breed, as they, much like ourselves, are not all made of the same cloth. I told this very presumptuous, demanding client of mine that no, I could not possibly fly him and his small entourage of friends and chefs and servants and so forth to his private island, as I was intent on enjoying my weekend with my wife and child and her sister. But my client would not take no for an answer. He began to behave on the phone exactly like a surly, petulant, precocious brat that was not getting his way. Let's just say money does talk. We know it does. And this man, who had more money than sense, was resolutely determined for me to fly him to his privately owned island. He was offering me a nice, generous windfall that I would have been a fool to refuse, because like your average American man, I have bills that need to be paid, and responsibilities. Let's just say this ostentatious client of mine wore designer glasses, thick, very brash gold chains around his neck, diamond watches that were so bright with bling they were almost blinding. Every time I took him to his private island, he was always so typically inviting ditzy, slim, blonde women to accompany him on these trips. Of course I knew they were only interested in the man for his money, for he had about as much charm as a disgruntled walrus, and was not exactly a likeable character. Actually, he was vulgar and crass. I was quite sure, even if I was a ditzy blonde, spending time in his company had to be insufferable to say the very least. So if they were milking him for the money, they pretty much earned every penny as far as I was concerned. It was at times like this that made me fully appreciate what I had in quality relationships with my wife Bridget and my son Hunter, as despite my client's wealth and opulent fancy lifestyle, with all his fancy sports cars and houses in Martha's Vineyard and Miami, along with trips to Monaco, I really believe his life was vacuously empty. It turned out I was right, as 3 years later he deliberately took his own life with a drug overdose, so all the money in the world and islands in the sea had not made him a happy man. Needless to say, my wife and child were grievously disappointed that I would not be home for that weekend, as I had accepted this job offer. Don't get me wrong, I do love my job, as flying people around in their private planes can be exhilarating indeed. But on this specific weekend, I had faithfully promised to spend that time with my family. So going on this plane, on this private flight, was the last thing I wanted to do. I had felt extremely indignant, as had my wife Bridget. She was in a foul mood. She felt I'd rarely let her down. I left the house feeling nothing less than a prize cad. I hated the way my rich clients would manipulate me in the way they did, like a puppet on a string, or threaten to never use me again as a pilot if I didn't agree to drop everything for them at a moment's notice, which is what these rich clients of mine had done to me over and over again. Because if I turned them down, then I knew that I would never get the job again. "Why are you doing this?" Bridget complained. "You promised me, Anton, you'd spend the weekend with us, and now you're letting us down again. Don't we matter to you at all? Or does your job always come first? Are you always going to prioritize your clients over us? We're your family. You know that Hunter was looking so forward to you taking him fishing at the creek over the weekend. He wanted to spend some quality time with his father, And now you're letting him down yet again. You're breaking his poor little heart.
I'm very sorry, love, but it's good money. This client of mine won't take no for an answer. If I refuse him my services, he'll never hire me again. And furthermore, he'll probably tell his own rich friends not to hire me either. I need the work, love, to provide for the family. I will make it up to the both of you, I promise.
But, Daddy, you promised to take me fishing at the creek,
Hunter protested.
You said we could also ride our mountain bikes down the trail. You promised, Daddy.
It broke my heart to see my son's obvious disappointment. But I knew I'd have to make it up to him another time. I'm sure he had heard those faint promises often enough, and I must have been beginning to sound like a broken record that was playing the same old tune yet again. My wife pulled a disenchanted face. She looked exasperated with me, and I couldn't blame her for that. But at the same time she appeared resigned to the fact that I would be absent from the house that weekend.
That's what I hate about your clients, Anton, she told me. Some of them are obnoxious. I'm sorry, but they are. They think they can wave their money around and you'll come running. Do these people even realize that you have your own life to live? Or have they completely forgotten about that? It seems to me they only think about themselves. That's all they think about. I can't stand these stinking rich clans of yours. They have absolutely no compassion or consideration.
It was on my return journey from dropping off my excessively wealthy client, with his entourage of chefs and servants and blonde women, to his privately owned island, that things became profoundly strange. I was flying over the Bermuda Triangle when everything went weird, and when I say weird, there is no other way to describe it. Everything was routine. It was a predictably normal flight, on a perfectly ordinary, unremarkable day, with good weather conditions, very clear visibility, and no turbulence whatsoever. I thought, like all my other flights, this would be routine as the next one, only it wasn't. All of a sudden, I saw this thick white mist materializing in front of my eyes, and my thoughts were, what the hell is that? All of a sudden, my client's plane dipped and began to shake and rattle precariously, and nothing in my plane appeared to be working. The communications went completely bonkers. But I refused to panic. As a pilot, you have to have your wits about you at all times. If you panic, that is when you can put your life and the lives of passengers on your flight in danger, as panic can make people do very stupid things without applying sensible reasoning. Suffice to say, I was unable to connect with airport control. My signals had gone completely haywire. I was vacuum suctioned down what I can only describe as some kind of vortex or wormhole. It was like I was flying through the white vapour, which appeared to be like a long, mysterious tunnel that was made up of white mist. When I reached the end of the tunnel, my plane became calm again, and everything began to operate smoothly, except I was not able to communicate with airport control anymore. I began to fly over land masses that I had never seen before a day in my life, and water that was purple and not blue at all. The first thought in my head was, where the hell am I? For I had never seen this geographic layout before. It was all unfamiliar to me and uncharted. What I was seeing made me realize that I must have slipped into a parallel universe that was vastly different to our own world, and yet uncannily similar at the very same time. Some people describe our world like an onion with many layers, and some of those layers represent different universes. For someone who had no imagination like myself, this was more than a little bewildering for me. I found myself flying over unfamiliar terrain. I observed high-rise buildings made of shimmering reflective glass, so incredibly different to our own, so much more advanced and sophisticated, that gave off a rainbow bedazzling layer of colours that were exquisitely beautiful, so much so that I have never seen colours such as this on our earth. It all took my breath away, and everything about this landscape was so much brighter and more vibrant than our earth. I thought I must be dreaming, and yes, I didn't want to leave this place because I was blown away by it all, and I was flying lower in order to take it all in. The next thing I knew is that I was met with more thick fog and another curious tunnel,
and I flew through this with another vacuum suction-like effect, and lo and behold, I was back on home turf again. Part of me was relieved, the other part of me extremely disappointed. I knew at once where I was. I recognized the terrain. I stared down at the vast ocean. Finally, everything began to operate smoothly. I was getting communication from airport control. They were saying that they had been panicking for they had lost my signal for a significant period of time, and my signal was spotted again on the radar. They had informed my wife about this anomaly, and she had become exceedingly distressed and worried about me. I am not sure what happened. Everything went by at what seemed like the speed of light. But it would seem I did enter a parallel universe for longer than I had imagined, without expending any energy on the plane, as if time had been of little relevance. I'm not going to kid. With hand on heart, I was a little disappointed to be back to a certain extent. I guess I would have liked to have made a greater study of this unorthodox world that I was privy to seeing. As you can appreciate, I had more questions about this than answers. I was like a worm in an apple, that had found myself in another area of the apple that I did not know existed, that tasted sweeter and juicier than the other parts of the apple that I was more familiar with. For days I wondered where I had been, and how I had not lost control of my plane, when everything had failed to work, and how my plane had expended no extra energy. By all accounts, my idiosyncratic experience shifted my paradigm of the world exponentially. Let's just say when I returned from that flight, I think I was a different person. The cynical side of my character had all but dissipated. Everybody was asking me what exactly happened, why my plane had inexplicably lost signal. But I simply said, I really don't know. And that is true to a certain extent. I guess it's one of those flukes, I said. Don't forget I was flying over the Bermuda Triangle. Weird things can happen there, right? I guess people accepted that rather feeble explanation of mine. What else could they do? I was not going to tell anybody what had happened to me. I was struggling to believe my bizarre experience myself. How could I possibly share it with anyone else? My wife, Bridget, was not so easily fooled. Neither was my 10-year-old son, Hunter. Both knew I was keeping something from them, but how could I tell them about my paradoxical experience when I was trying to come to terms with it myself, by asking myself again and again and again, did that really happen? But I assure you it most certainly did. I believe when strange things happen to a person, the vast majority of people don't want to share that experience with anyone, and it's not only for fear of ridicule, but because these things can be very, very personal. It was several days later that my wife's sister Helena moved into our farmhouse with us, even though she only lived a hair's breadth away from us, in a very similar house to our own. Dr. Levine had saliently advised her that she needed to be around her family for the time being, while her memory was somewhat fragmented. Thank God that slowly but surely Helena was regaining her memory. But I have to admit it was a long, laborious ride, with lots of bumps and jolts along the way to overcome. I'm very glad to say Helena finally remembered my wife was her sister. She also recalled my son Hunter, but I hasten to say for a long time she looked at me rather suspiciously, as if she thought I was an interloper that had weaved my way into the family, rather like an unsightly vine vandalizing a rosebed. Until, of course, my wife showed her pictures of our wedding day, to try and convince her that yes, she was indeed married to me. "Oh, I think I do remember you," she said to me suddenly, with almost a triumphant smile on her face. She looked up at me with a road map of worry lines across her forehead. "You fly planes for a living, don't you? You're a pilot." "That's right," I said. "You're doing very well. I think your memory is coming back. You would think that when a person had recovered from amnesia, that they would remember everything at once. But unfortunately, that is not how the brain works. The memory can be exceedingly patchy, and sometimes people can recall things that never actually happened to them, which in itself is rather incredulous. Think about it when you see someone in the supermarket and they come up to greet you. They seem familiar to you. They appear to know you, but you don't know where you know them from. Your memory betrays you, eludes you, and for a long time you can't even remember that person's name. Then maybe several days later, or even weeks, it all comes back to you, and you say, "Oh yes, I remember who that woman was." That was how ambiguously foggy it was for Helena. It was my wife Bridget who promptly suggested I took Helena back to the rock pools where she'd previously had her bizarre accident, of which no answers as to what had actually happened to her were even remotely forthcoming. Everything about what had happened was swathed in an aura of mystery. Helena loved those rock pools, my wife explained. That's where she had the nasty accident. I believe going back there might jog her memory, Anton. I might remind you that her mountain bike was discovered propped up under a tree by the large rock pool. I actually found it myself. So that is where she must have been when she sustained that nasty gash on her head. So going back there is a very good idea as far as I'm concerned. Sometimes going back to the scene of an accident can do wonders for the memory. You really believe that, do you? I asked my wife cynically, not believing for a single second that her reasoning made any sense at all. My wife, of course, nodded her head vigorously. I knew by the resolutely determined look on her face there would be no arguing with her. Not on this one, anyway. To convince me further that this was a very good idea, she said, "It's like when you fall off a horse, isn't it? You get straight back on, don't you? They say if you don't get back on the horse after a nasty injury you've sustained, that you might never ever ride again. I think it's very important for Helen to go back to the place where she took that unfortunate tumble, although God knows what really happened to her. I think you should take your swimming trunks along with you and make the experience fun for her. It's very important to do that. It's a very beguiling day today, and it would be good for the both of you to spend some time together. Helena's not entirely convinced you're my husband yet, even though I showed her all the wedding photographs. I still think she believes you're an imposter who has intruded into our lives, which is rather funny, actually. The other day she was telling me that you need watching. I don't think she entirely trusts you. So on this little outing, you can persuade her just how trustworthy you actually are." "Tell me about it," I said. "Your sister definitely thinks I'm an imposter. The looks she sometimes gives me are unsettling, to say the very least. Anyone would think I'd hijacked the entire family and were holding you all to ransom. Don't take it personally, love. She certainly doesn't mean to offend you. Her memory is a little twisted at the moment. Think about it, it's rather like untangling a bundle of knitting that's got so badly knotted up you almost give up. She has to work her way through all those tangles to make sense of everything. So you will take her to the rock pools, won't you?" "I don't know, love, if that's a good idea. As you keep saying, she's a bit wary of me. Besides anything else, would she really want to remember how she sustained her head injury in the first place? Maybe it's a good thing she can't remember something like that. I'm not sure I'd want to remember." My wife waved her hand in the air dismissively. "What are you talking about, Anton? Listen to yourself. Honestly, I sometimes despair with your nonsensical thinking at times. Of course Helena wants to remember everything. It bothers her that she has no memory of what actually happened to her. It's like she's got missing pieces from her somewhat fractured life, so to speak. She needs to put it together to make sense of everything. Imagine for a moment what it would be like for you if you couldn't remember whole chunks of your life. How would that make you feel, Anton?" "I wouldn't like it a bit," I admitted. "I guess I would be looking for answers, like your sister obviously is." "There you go, then. I prove my point, don't I? At the very least, just humour her for me, Anton. Take her to the beautiful rock pools. It'll do her a great deal of good. And at the very least, it'll be fun to have an outing." "So you really want me to do this, then? Spend the morning with your sister at the rock pools,
in the vain hope it might just recover her memory for her.
That's the idea, love. It's important for her to have a great time. Let her hair down a bit. Enjoy herself. Dr. Levine says amnesia patients go through an enormous amount of stress, as not remembering stuff can be very overwhelming for them. It can knock the stuffing right out of them. I can't imagine what that poor woman has been through. It doesn't bear thinking about. Imagine waking up and not knowing who the hell you are. It would freak me out for sure.
Me too, I agreed.
I tell you what, why don't you take the 4-seater ATV with you to get to the rock pools? I don't believe riding bicycles at this stage would be a great idea. I would of course come with you, but I need to do some tennis coaching. I'm having to take on some of Helena's students, so I'm super busy at the moment, having to work twice as hard for Helena's sake, until finally she gets back on her feet again. I've got so much to do. Helena, unfortunately, is still not up to speed again, to regain her position as a tennis coach yet, with her memory in tatters in the way it is. I doubt she even remembers her students. But let's just say we need to be positive about this. She's making excellent progress, and we need to be happy about that.
I think she's doing remarkably well, I agreed, and I'm quite sure she'll come right. The doctors seem sure she'll make a full recovery and be back to her old self again. But I guess we need to exercise a little patience, as you were saying. After all, Rome was not built in a day, was it?
I couldn't have put it better myself, Anton. Getting back to my point, if I may, it'll do the world of good for Helena to enjoy herself in a relaxing environment, and nothing could be better than those rock pools. They're idyllic. They really are. Dr. Levine told me the more relaxed she is, the more likely she is to remember. As he says, when you let go of your inhibitions and release the stress that you pile upon yourself, that is when miracles occur. Helena loves those rock pools, even though I'm sure she can't remember them. So I think it would be great for her to go back there again, splash around in the water like a child, and have the time of her life while she's doing it.
If you say so, love, I said in a very flat, uninspired voice that betrayed my complete lack of enthusiasm about the job I was about to undertake. Even a flight to a luxury island seemed less intimidating than my wife's sister somehow. My wife reached out to hug me, kissing me gently on the cheek.
I knew you wouldn't let me down, Anton.
I reluctantly found myself agreeing to take Helena in the ATV, along with my son Hunter, who was extremely enthused about the prospect of going swimming at the rock pools. I, on the other hand, was not so exhilarated by this thankless task. But I knew my wife Bridget needed me to pull my weight around the place, especially given she was working so hard. So I needed to watch over my wife's sister Helena for a while, splashing around in a rock pool. It was hardly what I would call a big ask. Needless to say, my son Hunter was very excited about showing Aunt Helena one of her favourite old haunting grounds that she would regularly frequent. He seemed to love reminding his aunt about all the stuff she'd forgotten about, as if he considered it his job to help Aunt Helena remember everything she had forgotten, which I thought was rather sweet of him. I couldn't help but feel that Hunter was by nature a very considerate young man.
You say I loved going there?
Aunt Helena asked Hunter, looking somewhat bemused.
Well, it sounds perfectly delightful, doesn't it? I do rather like the idea of swimming in a rock pool, but I can't remember having ever done so before. But it does seem that swimming would be something I would probably enjoy.
You didn't just enjoy it, Aunt Helena. You really, really loved it. You'd swim there all the time,
Hunter boldly informed her.
You said it was your favourite piece of paradise. That's what you called it. Sometimes I would go swimming there with you when you invited me to come along. I really loved going with you, but I had to get permission from Mum, and sometimes she wouldn't let me come. We'd ride our bicycles together down the dirt road from the house, and then we'd go down the woodland trail until we got to the rock pool. We would prop up our bicycles against a tree, and then we would go and hide behind some shrubbery to change into our swimming costumes. We had so much fun together, splashing around in the water. After you taught tennis with Mum, you would often come to the rock pools to refresh yourself and to have a swim, especially if it was a very, very hot day. Mum never ever came with you. She hates swimming. You'd beg her to come with you sometimes, but she refused. She never liked getting wet. But she's always described you as a water baby. You really don't remember any of this?
No, I'm afraid to say, Hunter, I don't remember anything, Helena admitted. She looked a tad frustrated. But as far as I was concerned, she was making steady progress, and slowly but surely beginning to remember things. I was certain her memory would finally come back. But whether she would recall how she'd fallen over and gashed her head was debatable. I felt my wife was being incredibly optimistic to believe that she could remember that. I say all this because I do vividly recall being in a car accident when I was all but 15 years old. I remember waking up in a hospital ward, being attended to by a couple of very devoted but worried nurses. Luckily, the injuries I sustained had been all but superficial, and I have absolutely no memory of what happened either before or after that accident. I couldn't help but feel Helena could be unlikely to remember how she sustained her injuries, but I kept those thoughts privately to myself. There was no point in poking the cat. The ATV whizzed down the undulating paths of the woodgrove on what I would describe as a spectacularly beautiful day. Prisms of bright morning sunshine danced through the branches of the trees, dappling everything in a very flattering, rather ethereal light. It was pleasant to be caught in this dreamy, seemingly subterranean oasis. Before long we reached the rock pools, where a waterfall of white water thundered down the rock face, and curtains of beautiful water gushed obstreperously into the large rock pool. The place was so magical that even I found myself feeling excited about taking a swim in that water, even though, like my wife, I've never professed to be much of a swimmer. Before long we were all using the shrubbery, whereupon we could modestly change into our swimming clothes. Although the place was quiet, there were occasions when strangers might decide to swim in the rock pools, and I hoped that we would have the place all to ourselves today. Before long we were diving into the water, splashing around happily, and having a good laugh together. It seemed that Helena had not forgotten how to swim. It was almost instinctive with her, and I sincerely hoped it would be the same when Helena returned to coaching tennis. I did know from my wife that Helena was an exceptional teacher, and I thought it would be such a pity to lose those skills. All of a sudden we were playing around in the water, laughing and tossing a ball around that my son had brought along for the ride. I had this profound sense that something was watching us. I wondered if I was imagining this. It really had not seemed like we would be disturbed, but I had a profound sense that someone had intruded on our space. Perhaps someone this morning had ventured down the trail and was spying on us through the shrubbery. It was, I will admit, a slightly discomposing thought. I glanced briefly from Helena to my son, who was splashing around gregariously in the water, obliviously unaware of what I had sensed. I told myself, with a lot of persuasion, that I was being stupid. There was probably nothing there after all. I was surprised when Hunter was the first one to get out of the water. I would have joined him, of course, but I didn't want to leave Helena unattended. I would not hear the end of it from my wife, that was for sure. The bad news was that Helena didn't seem in a rush to get out of the water. By the time she did, I figured out that my fingers would be all shriveled up. Even if Helena could not remember the rock pools, she was a water baby, and that was certain.
"I'm going to get dressed, Dad," said Hunter, climbing out of the water.
He walked over casually to the ATV to retrieve his folded clothes on one of the seats. Along with a towel, he dried himself roughly and promptly went to hide behind some shrubbery, undoubtedly to get dressed back into his shorts and t-shirt. This is what he told me happened next, in his own words. Hunter: I found some respectable shrubbery far enough away from the rock pool, where I could remove my swimming trunks and change into my shorts and t-shirt without making a spectacle of myself, as I didn't want to undress in front of Aunt Helena. I felt so invigorated and refreshed from the swim. It really had been fun. I was smiling contentedly to myself. I had really enjoyed spending time with my father and with Aunt Helena. It was not often that I got to spend quality time with my father. Even though I guess he'd refused to admit it, I could see he was thoroughly enjoying himself as he tossed a ball from me to Aunt Helena. He claimed not to be a water person, but I beg to differ. I don't think I'd seen my father look this happy and this relaxed in such a long time. I was, of course, sad that Aunt Helena couldn't remember her favourite haunt, for these rock pools have always been so very special to her over the years. But it didn't matter. She was enjoying herself now, and I was sure she'd want to come back here again and again in the future. I suspected she'd remain in the rock pool for a lot longer, splashing around in the water like she always used to. My father would invariably be compelled to stay with her, and that would be a good thing, I thought. I was glad Aunt Helena was living in our house at the moment. She needed all the support and encouragement she could get during this rather tumultuous time when she was trying to regain her memory. This amnesia malarkey is not to be trifled with. It's serious stuff. I couldn't imagine what it must be like to lose your memory like that. I was sad that I had lost Max, my dog, but I couldn't imagine never remembering an animal that I'd always loved. If I forgot Max, I'd be devastated. He's so firmly wedged in my heart, and is always alive in my memories. And if I lost my memory of him, that would be tragic. It really would. I think Aunt Helena's amnesia had caused swelling on the brain. Well, that's what I deduced from the doctor anyway. As I was drying my wet hair with a towel, I sensed something was watching me. I looked up from the curtain of shrubbery and was quite taken aback to see it was my Aunt Helena, looking directly at me. Talk of the devil, I thought. What the hell was she doing here, staring at me so gormlessly like that? I was 10 years old, but I didn't appreciate being spied on while I was getting changed. I couldn't help but wonder how long Aunt Helena had been standing there gawking at me. To my amazement, I noticed she was wearing an unfamiliar but very flattering flowery dress that I'd never seen before, and her hair was already dry. How was that remotely possible? Moments before, it had been sopping wet from diving under the water. She was smiling at me warmly, and I returned her smile ever so reluctantly. But it didn't meet my eyes, simply because I don't like being caught off guard like this. It's a little like your mother finding you with your hand in the cookie jar. It had given me quite a shock to see Helena standing there. I didn't even know you were there, Aunt Helena. I thought you were swimming with Dad. How did you manage to get dressed so quickly? My aunt appeared not to be listening to me. She gestured for me to follow her. Why don't you come with me now, Hunter? I've got something to show you. I raised my brow in surprise at this point. I was feeling rather befuddled. Now I came to think about it, there was no way that Aunt Helena could have beaten me in getting dressed, as I was the one who'd left the rock pool first. I was still stumped by how incredulous it was that her hair was miraculously dry and mine remained sopping wet. And furthermore, Aunt Helena had arrived at the rock pool wearing red shorts and a t-shirt. So where did this dress suddenly materialize from? She had made no mention of bringing other clothes along with her on the ride. But then again, she was so scatty these days. Anything was a possibility. I knew I'd never seen the flowery dress before, and Aunt Helena never wore dresses, so to say I was taken aback is an understatement. But my mother had informed me that people's personalities can dramatically change after a head injury. Had Aunt Helena become very feminine all of a sudden? The next thing I knew, she'd probably be wearing makeup, and I'd never seen her wear lipstick a day in her life. But nothing would surprise me now. Aunt Helena, I don't understand how you got out of the water so quickly, I repeated. I don't understand. It makes no sense to me. I thought you wanted to stay in the rock pool for a bit longer. Weren't you enjoying yourself in there? You ask too many questions, Hunter. My aunt giggled. You know me. I get things done quickly, don't I? You're upset because I beat you in getting dressed. Come on, I want to show you something. It's very important. You're going to love it.
But what about Dad? He's going to worry about us if we wander off, I protested. He'll wonder where we are.
I told your dad I had a secret to show you, didn't I? He agreed for me to show you this wonderful thing. Aunt Helena's idiosyncratic behaviour was making my heckles really rise. She'd lost her memory for sure. Even coming here today, she claimed the terrain was all unfamiliar to her. And she had no memories of the rock pools, where she'd regularly come to enjoy a swim on a scorching hot day. Now she was claiming to want to show me a secret. So something felt really off. What was she wanting to show me, I wondered? Was my aunt completely losing her mind? Or was she having a false memory of some kind? Dr. Levine had warned us that this could sometimes happen. One thing I knew for certain is that Aunt Helena was changing before my very eyes, and I didn't want her to change at all. I liked her the way she was. As if sensing my obvious reluctance to follow her, my aunt impulsively grabbed my hand. I was surprised she was this strong, but then I guess if you played tennis for as long as she has, you probably have a formidable grip. I knew Aunt Helena was one hell of a good tennis player, so it was a promising sign that she still hadn't lost her strength after that accident of hers. Come on, Hunter. Stop being such a wet blanket. I promise you're going to love what I have to show you. I promise you that. What is it? I asked, looking bemused, wondering what it was that appeared to have excited Aunt Helena so much. I couldn't help thinking that she was really losing her mind, and that this was a symptom that had suddenly emerged, that had left me feeling discomposed. What was going on with Aunt Helena? Was she losing her marbles finally? I rather suspected that she was, and this would not go down well with my mother, who pretty much idolized Aunt Helena. Aunt Helena seemed resolutely determined to show me something. There was nothing about her demeanour to suggest she was suffering from an impaired memory. On the contrary, everything about her manner exuded a forthright determination. She walked through the groves like someone who knew exactly where she was going, and that was not right. Something was off, it really was, but I couldn't fathom what it exactly was. I wondered if my mother would think Aunt Helena was acting strange, and what would she say about Aunt Helena's sundress that she was now wearing? For where did that come from? Aunt Helena had never worn dresses. When I tried to pull away from Aunt Helena, she held my hand down with a forceful grip that was so hard that I winced in pain. Her voice became a lot less sweet. Come on, Hunter, get a move on. We haven't got all day. It was when I looked up into my aunt's eyes. I realized that this was not my aunt, because her kind brown eyes had gone all yellow. And suddenly I felt terribly afraid. In a trice, the facade that Aunt Helena was wearing just slipped away, like butter sliding down a steaming hot corn cob. In that second, I realized that Aunt Helena was not Aunt Helena. I very nearly fainted on the spot from the sheer shock of it all. The hideous thing I was seeing now was wearing my aunt's image, like a holographic disguise of sorts. I'd been sucked right in, like a lamb being led to the slaughter. I tried to pull my hand away from this hideous beast, but this thing's grip on me was so steely hard. If I'd succeeded, I'd have probably broken my arm. But that was the least of my concerns right now. This thing, whatever it was extremely dangerous. My mind was screaming, this can't be real. Wake up, Hunter. You're just having a horrible nightmare. That's all this is. It's not real. But I did know that what was unfolding before me was real. I was to learn later, after my father did a lot of research, that this creature that we encountered, well, I encountered at first, was called the Kushtaka, otherwise known as Ottoman. I had a sense that I would be his very next meal, like a great big fish he'd caught, that he fully intended to get his sharp teeth into. And believe me, this thing had sharp teeth, for when he opened his mouth I could see how razor-sharp they actually were. All I could do in that quintessential moment to help myself was scream out, in the vain hope that my father or Aunt Helena might just hear me. But would my cries for help actually reach the rock pool? And how would they even be able to rescue me from this formidable beast? My father had not come to the rock pools armed, that was for sure. He wouldn't be able to stand up against this creature. I screamed loudly, in the vain hope that someone might just come to my rescue. The Kushtaka laughed at me mockingly, sensing the hopelessness of my situation, enjoying my dismay. "No point in calling out for help, Hunter," he said in my aunt's voice. "You're all mine now, and you're going to taste jolly good, you are." I tried to fight this horrible creature off by kicking at him, but I was no match. The Kushtaka threw me over his powerful back and began to run with me through the grove at a very impressive speed. And that was when I knew my life was hanging by a thread. It would all be over for me pretty soon. It made me sad, but another part of me was resigned to my plight, almost as if I had surrendered to the inevitability of my fate. I knew the Kushtaka was running towards the large lake, because he took the trail to the left. That led to the lake. It was quite a popular fishing destination for some folk. I kicked and screamed, and that was when I heard something else running towards me. My first thought it was another Kushtaka. Please God, no. That was going to make my ability to escape this creature all the more impossible. The Kushtaka stopped dead in his tracks, grunting angrily. He sounded pissed off, as if something had annoyingly interrupted his plans. That was when I saw the Bigfoot standing on the path. He stared straight at the Kushtaka, with dark, furious eyes. The two creatures began to fight. And they could fight. If a human being got entwined in that fight, they'd have been killed in a second. The Kushtaka was using his tail, thrashing it around like a deadly weapon, beating the Bigfoot with it. But the Bigfoot nimbly jumped out of his way. I realized the two critters were fighting over me. That was very clear. Fists were flying all over the place. There was growling and roaring and leg-kicking, while all the time the Kushtaka was holding me down with one hand and adjusting his other hand and using both his tail and arm as weapons. I think he didn't want to release his hold on me. I was so afraid that I closed my eyes as tightly as I could. I was begging to God for this to be over. The fighting was so terrifying and seemed to go on forever and ever, until finally the Kushtaka conceded defeat. He handed me over rather swiftly to the Bigfoot, in surrender, looking mortified to have given me up. He slunk away sheepishly down the undulating path that led directly to the lake, looking at me from slumped shoulders, almost like a child who had been told he couldn't have the ice cream. I stood there on the forest floor, staring up at the Bigfoot with wide, mesmerized eyes. I was terrified because he was so big, so incredibly intimidating, so large in girth and size, much more so than the Kushtaka. I think he could have been 10 foot tall or more, built like the Incredible Hulk, covered in long flowing dark hair. He possessed a human-looking face that reminded me of my late grandfather. I found myself looking directly into his eyes, as if an invisible magnet had drawn me to focus on him. It was when I was looking into his eyes that my fear dissipated, because his eyes were so kind. "Kampasi Katwana, Kolombasi Lano. Don't be afraid, young man," the Bigfoot said to me, in words that miraculously translated to me in my head in English. This was way better than any translation app, as I understood everything he was saying. "Kolapisa nakwa, Kolomposolani. You are lucky I rescued you, boy. I heard your cries for help. Kolopati galasana kwa dunsa dilasiko. You mustn't underestimate Dunsa. He's very dangerous. He lives at the lake. That was where I expect he was taking you. He can pretend to be anything he wants to be. That's how he skillfully catches his prey. He didn't want to give you up. I had quite a fight to get you. I knew when I heard your screams that Dunsa had tried to trap you. He did this a couple of weeks back with a poor lady who comes to the woods regularly to swim at the rock pools over there. I always watch over that woman to ensure she's safe. But I was distracted on that occasion, and Dunsa took his chances with her. I knew he would one day do that, and I wasn't wrong. He's always looking for those open gaps of opportunity, like he did today, to get up to his insidious mischief.
Cantila sucupona tila siquasina onto. Let's just say I find when my back is turned for a single second, Dunsa wastes no opportunity to strike. That poor woman tried to escape him. Luckily I heard her screams like I heard your calls for help. I fought Dunsa for that woman, like I fought for you. And finally he released her to me. But she fell back on a rock and hit her head badly, losing her footing. I blame myself for that. I wish I'd caught her in time. But luckily I noticed she's all right. I saw her swimming in the rock pool a moment ago.
That was my aunt you saw. You rescued her, like you rescued me. Thank you for that. I need to go back to the rock pools now, where you saw my aunt and father swimming. They're probably wondering where I've got to. It was at that point I heard my father's voice. He was calling my name.
Hunter, Hunter, where are you, Hunter?
My father was walking up the trail. He stopped short in his tracks, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Looking back, it was actually quite funny, really. My father's extremely sceptical, you see. He'd never believe in anything that he would consider fanciful, and I'm sure that's exactly what he thought a Bigfoot was, until he saw one standing right next to me. For a second he rubbed his eyes, as if he thought he had to be dreaming, and then his jaw practically dropped wide open, like a Venus flytrap. He was looking from me to the Bigfoot in complete bewilderment, not knowing how to react. For how do you react when you see your son standing next to a 10-foot creature that doesn't appear to be doing your son harm? But then again, how can you be sure of anything until you've read the situation more clearly? Moments later, Aunt Helena emerged behind my father. She looked from me to the Bigfoot, and then an extraordinary thing happened. It was like a light of recognition dawned in her eyes, as if a memory deep within her resurfaced. She pointed her finger at the Bigfoot excitedly. "You were the one that rescued me. You saved me from that monster that tried to pretend he was my sister. You saved me. I never got to thank you, because everything went blank when I fell back on that rock. My memory just blacked out." The Bigfoot spoke to us, and paradoxically we understood everything he was saying.
"I'm very glad you're all right, ma'am. Dunsa meant to harm you. He saw you as an easy meal. He had the same designs on this young man over here,"
he said, pointing to me.
"But I rescued him. I have told Dunsa to leave the lake area at once. He is no longer welcome on my territory. I have warned him if he comes here again I shall kill him myself. He's got off lightly this time, but he went too far. He can't be trusted to behave himself, and I'm not putting up with his nonsense a moment longer. He has got out of control. Twice he has done this. There are plenty of fish in the lake for him to enjoy, but Dunsa loves to play with his prey. And he doesn't need to eat your kind, but he does have an extensive palate. I am the custodian of the woods in these parts, and he has breached his rights to stay here, so he has to move on, or he's dead. It's as simple as that. Now you know you will be safe here in the future, because he will not be coming back."
"Thank you so much for saving my nephew," said Aunt Helena, dashing towards me and enveloping me in her arms. She looked up at the Bigfoot gratefully and said, "Thank you again. Thank you for saving me and my nephew." The Bigfoot nodded, and then he turned around to address my father.
"I see that you've been to a parallel universe. Very interesting. It's not every day your kind gets to visit another layer of our reality. I never expected to see that in one of your kind, but the marking on you is undeniable."
My father looked dumbfounded.
"How do you know that?" he asked the Bigfoot,
his face dropping to the ground, as if he thought the Bigfoot was a sage of some kind that was about to tell him his entire life story. I didn't know what the Bigfoot meant when he said my dad had been to a parallel universe, but it seemed my father knew exactly what he was talking about, and the expression on his face was one of marvel and wondrous awe.
"You have a purple glow to your aura. You've been to Andromeda. It's a parallel universe. If you are dappled with a spot of purple condensation in your aura, then we know you've been to a drometer. It's like a stamp on your body that affirms you've been there. I've been there myself on multiple occasions. So I've got the purple condensation mark on my aura as well. I can see you're confused about the experience you had. Don't be. Just remember, he said, pointing to the earth, this is not all there is. Many of your kind don't know this, because they are susceptible to confusion, so their minds are closed to these truths, rather like a flower that has not yet opened to see the sun shining upon its petalled face.
At that, the Bigfoot turned around and glided away, before my dad could ask him any more questions. Later, my father did tell us about his experience over the Bermuda Triangle, and about the wormhole he had entered in his plane, where he found himself in a parallel universe,
where the ocean water was exquisitely purple. That, I guess, is what the Bigfoot had been talking about when he referred to a parallel universe, of which my father had been privy to seeing. I'm glad to say in the weeks that followed, Aunt Helena completely regained her memory. But the meeting of the Bigfoot in the woodgrove had, I suspected, been the turning point for her. Finally, she told us her story. It was uncannily similar to my own. Let's just say the cunning foe, the Kushtaka, can lure the most unsuspecting among us into his duplicitous traps. Pretty easily, I have to say. Aunt Helena's account. It was horrifying, having to be brought to a hospital by a very kind farmer, and not knowing who I was, or whether I had a family or not, because my memory was so impaired I was drawing blanks. The doctors informed me that I had sustained a nasty head wound that had caused a significant amount of bruising on my brain. I had lost a significant amount of blood, and had several stitches on my scalp, and many tests were performed on me. Dr. Levine seemed reasonably confident that once the bruising subsided, my body would start to heal and my memory come back. Unless, he said, my memory had been repressed by trauma. I certainly hoped that that was not the case. But it would be a long time before we found the answers. That's what he told me anyway. I was to discover my memory appeared to be annoyingly patchy, rather like looking at a picture book, where half the picture's been torn out, and you try to remember how the other half looked. The good news is my memory came back to me after a very nonchalant visit to a rock pool, where I went to enjoy a swim with my sister's husband and my nephew Hunter. I was thoroughly enjoying myself playing around in the water. When my nephew Hunter had no desire to swim any more, he promptly left the rock pool to go and change back into his clothes behind some shrubbery. I remained in the water with Hunter's father for a little longer, as I was eager to continue swimming. I told Anton that he didn't need to stay with me in the water, and that I was happy to swim alone, but he insisted on staying with me in the rock pool until I finally decided to get out. When we both finished our swims and got dressed, I returned to the ATV, and Anton came towards me looking very agitated. "Have you seen Hunter anywhere?" "No, I can't say I have. I saw him last when he got out of the water to go and change behind the shrubbery, but I haven't seen him since." Anton began to panic. He proceeded to tell me that he was absolutely certain that someone had been watching us when we were swimming in the rock pool. I could see there was genuine fear in his eyes. We both began to run through the woods together, calling out Hunter's name. I was walking behind Anton down the footpath when he stopped dead in his tracks. When I caught up with him, I could see that Hunter was standing next to a large Bigfoot on the trail, and in that pivotal moment, my memories came flooding back. I remembered that this was the Bigfoot that had saved my life, that had rescued me from the Kushtaka. So you may wonder, what did happen to me on the day after I sustained a nasty, rather mysterious head wound, which caused me to lose my memory? Well, it began much like any other routine day. Nothing really special about it. I had been doing tennis coaching with my sister. She was teaching another student on another court. The student I was teaching on that particular day was an obnoxious 14-year-old teenager called Prissy, short for Priscilla, I believe.
She was one of the most self-entitled students I've ever had the privilege of teaching. Let's just say, unlike many students I teach, this was a girl that didn't want to be on the tennis court with me. She had no desire to learn how to play the game. It was a hot, unpleasant day. The tennis court felt like a sauna. Prissy began to sulk tirelessly, and was completely uncooperative during the game. She didn't even appear to be trying. She willfully complained that she hated tennis and that she was only here because her parents insisted she learnt to play the game. I realized with her stinky attitude she wasn't going to get very far with learning how to play tennis, because with the best will in the world, if you don't want to do something, then you invariably won't succeed in doing it. When Prissy's mother came to pick up Prissy from her lesson in her fancy sports car, I told Prissy's mother in no uncertain terms that I couldn't go on teaching her daughter, and that went down with Prissy's mother like a lead balloon, as you can imagine. "What are you saying, Mrs. Ferguson?" said Prissy's mother, giving me a glare. "Why are you refusing to teach my girl to play tennis? Is my money not good enough for you? Is that it? I'm paying you very good money to teach her tennis." Prissy's mother, Natalie Hewitt, was almost as bad as Prissy herself, I have to say. She had this vainglorious, self-entitled attitude. I think she believed that everybody else, including myself, was beneath her. She was like the queen bee in a colony of worker bees, who fussed around her all day long, so to speak. I was in no doubt that that was how she conducted the affairs of her own life. I'm pretty sure she wore the pants in her household and bossed everyone around, including that husband of hers. "Look, Mrs. Hewitt," I said, "I would very much like to continue teaching your daughter tennis. It's my job to teach tennis, but I'm afraid that Prissy has made it perfectly clear that she hates the game. Her attitude sucks. I'm sure you must agree I can't teach someone to play a game they clearly don't want to learn to play. Quite frankly, it's a waste of your money and a waste of my time." "What are you saying?" snapped Mrs. Hewitt contemptuously. "Honestly, listen to yourself, Miss Ferguson. You're so defeatist. What are you talking about? My daughter wants to play tennis, but it's clear to me you don't want to teach her. You're the one that's got the problem. And the stinky attitude that sucks, Miss Ferguson, is not coming from my Prissy. It's coming from you," said Mrs. Hewitt. "You want to play tennis, don't you, Prissy?" she said, looking at her daughter for confirmation on this. Prissy nodded her head as if she agreed entirely with her mother, that of course she wanted to play tennis. But she was smirking, and there was a rather self-satisfied smug look on her face, as if she revelled in stirring up trouble, like being a cat among the pigeons and causing chaos wherever she went, which undoubtedly is what she loves to do. "So there you go, Miss Ferguson. My daughter has just confirmed to you that of course she loves to play tennis," said Mrs. Hewitt, poking me in the chest with one of her painted, very sharp-pointed talons. "So there you go. You'll be teaching my Prissy. You'll be teaching her, is that understood? I'll be here at her lesson on Tuesday sharp, and I'll watch the entire game. I don't want you letting me down, Miss Ferguson. I'm paying you good money. Look, Mrs. Hewitt, as I keep saying to you, I'm happy to teach your daughter, but she must change her attitude. I can't possibly teach someone that doesn't want to learn. My daughter wants to learn, Miss Ferguson. She's told you herself," said Mrs. Hewitt, grabbing her daughter's hand and charging off defiantly to her car. "We'll be back on Tuesday. See you then." "What on earth was all that commotion about, with you, Prissy, and her mother?" asked my sister, when her student was finally picked up by her own mother, and we were enjoying some cold lemonade together. "I'd rather not talk about it," I said. "I'm going to the rock pool for a swim. Would you like to come?" "Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? You know me and water. We don't mix." It was a searing hot day as I cycled on the back of my bicycle to the bottom of the dirt road and then finally through the woodland trail. I was so glad to reach the trees, so that the hot sunshine was finally cast away, and I was shaded by the umbrella they offered. It felt good to be on my own, listening to the pretty trills of the birdsong. I suddenly felt remarkably happy, as all thoughts of Prissy and her pompous mother were cast away. I was greeted to the heady sound of water crashing against the rocks, and I knew I'd reached the rock pool. I parked my mountain bike under a tree and took my towel and swimming costume out of the basket in the front of my bicycle, and I went to hide behind some shrubbery to change, just in case somebody was around. I knew I had the rock pools to myself, but there were times other people would walk down that trail, and I just did not want to be found in a compromising position. I had once gone skinny dipping in the rock pools, only to discover 4 people in swimming costumes had joined me in the water. I had to wait for them to leave, because I couldn't let them know that I was stark naked. So I could never allow that to happen to me again, for when I emerged from that water, my skin had become a shriveled prune. I felt so invigorated after my swim. It was refreshing and beautiful, the water so cool. At one point I was sure I'd seen a shadowy figure watching me, but I told myself that that impression had been created in my own head, a trick of the light perhaps. Little did I know that the Kushtaka had been watching me surreptitiously. He'd been biding his time, waiting to lure me into his deceptive trap, with about as much cunning as he had done with my nephew Hunter a couple of weeks later. As I got out of the rock pool, I shook myself like a dog with a very thick coat. I grabbed my towel to dry my hair rather vigorously. I then looked around me to see that nobody was around. I wondered, could I take my chance and quickly throw on my clothes? I was sure no one was coming. Just as I'd finished putting on my shorts and my T-shirt, I looked up, rather befuddled, to see my sister walking towards me. She was wearing nothing but a swimming costume, and she had a big grin on her face. Seeing my sister clad in a swimming costume was very surprising, to say the least. She's not a water baby, never inclined to swim. Even when we go to the Ghost, all she does is lie on a beach towel, reading a book. "What the hell?" I said. "Fancy seeing you here. What are you doing? What does it look like, sis? I've come to join you for a swim." "But you don't even like swimming." "I do now, sis. Come on, come with me. Let's go and have some fun," she said, grabbing my hand, leading me to the rock pool, where we began to paddle in the shallow end. And when I looked down at her foot, it started to morph into a webbed foot. I let out a shrill scream, because I realized this person that I was with was not my sister. I think the holographic projection from the Kushtaka had all but slipped away. "You're not my sister!" I cried out. "Get away from me! Go away!" I tried to run away from the Kushtaka as fast as I could, but in a split second he had grabbed me so hard I fell on the ground, and his hand was clasped on my foot. He looked down at me with a smirk, and no longer was I seeing my sister, but an 8-foot humanoid creature that resembled an otter. His tail was thrashing around, and with one foot he dragged me over some rocks, through some thorny briars, and finally reached down to pick me up and throw me over his back. And then he began to run with me very fast through the woods, down the left path that led straight to the lake. In that moment I knew I was going to be this critter's dinner, for this thing only had intentions of eating me. Of that I was sure. All I could do was call out for help, and not for a second did I believe any help would arrive. But help was closer than I could have ever envisaged, and there, stomping through the trees, was a huge Bigfoot, possibly about 10 foot tall. When he saw the Kushtaka holding me down on his back, he roared with indignant rage. The Kushtaka had tried to make his escape from the Bigfoot, but the Bigfoot had run up to him, and a fight ensued between the both of them. Eventually the Kushtaka handed me over to the Bigfoot ever so bashfully. But from the recent rains we'd had, the rock I was standing on was so slippery I fell backwards and landed on my head. The Bigfoot told me I was going to be all right, even though I felt very feeble. I intended to walk home instead of take my bicycle, but I guess I must have passed out in the woodgrove for some time, and that was where the farmer found me. All these years later I'm married to Hans, the farmer that I'd met. A very kind man he is too. He visited me in the hospital with flowers. The rest is history. The good news is I've fully regained my memory, and still teach a mean game of tennis. And now and then I teach kids like Prissy, but I guess that's life for you. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.